Imagine a time when nightfall truly meant the end of the day. No streetlights flickered on, no hum of electricity, no gentle glow slipping beneath doors from a lamp left on in the hallway. When the sun sank below the horizon, the world was swallowed by darkness, so complete that even the outlines of familiar paths blurred into shadow. For our ancestors, this darkness was not just an inconvenience. It was a living force, one that could both comfort and terrify, one that shaped the way people lived, prayed, worked, and slept. Before lanterns spread their steady glow, people navigated a world where the unknown pressed in from every side once twilight passed. The story of how humanity found its way through the dark is one of ingenuity, fear, ritual, and resilience. Before we step into that world together, I want to invite you to take part in this journey with us. This channel, History for Sleep, is here to bring you softly spoken stories of the past, carefully told to help you drift into rest. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps us continue to create long, soothing explorations of history just for you. I'd also love for you to leave a comment below. Tell us what time of day or night you like to listen, and what parts of history you'd like to hear about in the future. Your ideas not only inspire us, but they help shape the stories we bring to life. So, let your thoughts slow down, let your body sink into comfort, and allow the story to carry you. Tonight, we're going to journey into a world lit only by fire and starlight. We'll uncover how people managed in the hours after sunset, what dangers lurked, and how culture and creativity grew in the deep hours of the night. Let the rhythm of the past ease your mind, and if sleep comes before the story ends, know that history will wait here for you whenever you wish to return. When the final light of the sun dipped beneath the horizon in the eye, ancient world, the transition was not gradual and forgiving the way it often feels in our modern times, when city skylines, glowing screens, and constant hums of electricity blur the boundary between day and night. Instead, nightfall descended like a curtain, absolute and undeniable. The final hints of red and gold in the sky quickly yielded to deep indigo, and then to the weight of a darkness so thick it seemed to have texture. For the people of millennia past, this daily shift was profound. Nightfall was not simply a change in the sky. It was a transformation of the entire environment, shaping how people thought, felt, and moved. Imagine the sounds of a small village as twilight approached. The voices of children playing outside began to fade. Mothers called their families indoors, and fathers or elders stoked the last of the fires that would serve as both light and protection for the long hours ahead. The smoke of wood and straw lingered in the air, and the smell of cooking slowly gave way to the sharper scent of extinguished flames as the community prepared for rest. The ground that seemed so familiar during the day became unpredictable. Stones and roots that were easily avoided when the sun was shining became traps in the dark, waiting to twist an ankle or send someone tumbling. The familiar outlines of houses and fields dissolved, and even one's own home could feel unfamiliar once the shadows took over. For most of human history, darkness was a living presence. It was not merely the absence of light, but something that pressed in from all sides. It muffled the senses and demanded caution. In the countryside, nightfall could mean silence interrupted only by the cries of distant animals, the rustling of wind in trees, or the unnerving snap of a twig. In cities, it was different, but equally unsettling. Ancient Rome, Athens, or Babylon, for instance, were not the bustling centers after dusk that modern cities are today. Once the sun went down, people knew that streets became far more dangerous, and most hurried to their homes before night closed in. There were practical reasons for this caution. Without light, crime was easier. Thieves and bandits used the cloak of darkness to their advantage, moving silently between alleyways or waiting on unlit roads to catch travelers unaware. Soldiers and night watchmen did exist, but their presence was limited, and in some places, their calls through the night served as both a warning and a comfort. To hear the patrol's footsteps echoing on cobblestones reassured those inside their homes. Yet it also reminded them of what dangers lurked outside in the blackness. But beyond the threats of the physical world, there were also the fears shaped by imagination and belief. To ancient peoples, night was the realm of the unknown, and with the unknown came stories of spirits, demons, and gods who ruled in the absence of the sun. In Mesopotamia, for example, night was tied to gods of the underworld and chaos, and people believed the veil between the human world and the supernatural was thinnest after dusk. In Egypt, the setting sun represented the god Rhea's journey through the underworld, battling serpents and forces of destruction before his rebirth at dawn. In Greece, Nyx, the goddess of night, was one of the most powerful primordial deities, embodying the mysterious, impenetrable nature of darkness. For many, the shadows themselves were alive, filled with presences unseen but deeply felt. Still, despite its dangers and fears, nightfall was not solely an enemy. It was also a time of rest and renewal. For communities bound to the rhythms of the sun, darkness offered a natural signal to slow down, to retreat from the intensity of daily labor, and seek safety and peace within the household. Families gathered close to one another, around the dim light of a hearth. They told stories, sang songs, and passed along knowledge through spoken word, since writing and reading by firelight or candle was often too costly or impractical for most. These hours, though shrouded in darkness, were also the hours of intimacy, of bonding, and of imagination. Picture an ancient farmhouse with its family huddled together, the fire in the center of the room casting a circle of wavering light. The children sit close to their parents, eyes wide as they listen to tales of heroes, gods, or perhaps a simple story meant to lull them into sleep. The shadows on the walls dance with every shift of the flame, creating shapes that look like beasts or spirits. These images, both comforting and frightening, became part of the night's atmosphere. The interplay of flickering light and surrounding darkness shaped not only the imagination, but also the cultural identity of entire civilizations. Nightfall also reshaped the human body and mind. Before the age of artificial lighting, people often slept in segments rather than in one long stretch. They would go to bed soon after nightfall, sleep for several hours, and then awaken in the middle of the night for a period of quiet wakefulness. This time, sometimes called the first sleep and second sleep, was used for prayer, reflection, or soft conversation. Then they would return to slumber until dawn. This rhythm was natural, aligned with the long stretches of darkness that could last 12 to 16 hours, depending on the season. In this sense, night was not simply endured. It became a cycle of activity, contemplation, and rest, unlike anything most modern people experience. In villages and towns, nightfall was a collective experience. The extinguishing of daylight was felt by all at once, uniting communities in shared vulnerability. A bell might ring to mark curfew, reminding people to return indoors. Fires or torches might be lit in communal spaces, but their reach was limited, leaving vast stretches in shadow. The night was vast, and humanity felt small within it. And yet, this vulnerability also nurtured cooperation. People leaned on one another more closely, found comfort in shared presence, and relied on collective memory to navigate spaces even without light. For those who traveled, the darkness presented a greater challenge. Paths that were clear in daylight could twist and vanish under moonless skies. Without a torch or firebrand, even the most familiar road could become treacherous. A lone traveler might find the stars or the phases of the moon as their only guide, and clouds could erase even that faint help. Few willingly risked such journeys, for the hazards of terrain, wild animals, and human malice multiplied after sunset. Yet when necessity forced movement at night, each step was taken with caution, each sound magnified, each shadow scrutinized for threat. To understand nightfall in the ancient world is to realize how profound the absence of light truly was. Today, we speak of darkness as a metaphor: ignorance, fear, mystery. But in earlier times, it was not merely metaphorical. It was physical, unavoidable, and deeply woven into the rhythms of existence. Entire mythologies, customs, and ways of living were shaped by the nightly descent of shadow. And so, when we think of our ancestors, huddled by flickering flames or lying awake in the hours between first and second sleep, we glimpse a world where night was both a menace and a muse. It inspired awe, demanded caution, and nurtured bonds between people who faced it together. The story of darkness is the story of humanity learning to adapt, to imagine, and to survive when the sun's protection was gone. This was nightfall in the ancient world, a moment when everything familiar slipped into shadow, and every flame, however small, became a beacon of hope. When night descended and the world fell into shadow, humanity often turned its gaze upward. Above the darkness of the earth stretched a sky of quiet brilliance, dotted with countless stars and the steady glow of the moon. Long before lanterns, before cities began to block the heavens with their light, the night sky was a vast map, a calendar, a source of myth, and a companion in the hours when the earth below was cloaked in uncertainty. For many, it was the only source of guidance in the blackness, offering a soft glow that illuminated paths, marked the passage of seasons, and gave meaning to the seemingly endless night. The moon was perhaps the most dependable friend to people navigating the dark. Its phases shaped the rhythm of life. A full moon transformed the landscape into silver and shadow, revealing details of roads, fields, and forests that were otherwise invisible after sunset. On those nights, travel was possible, and gatherings might extend into the hours usually surrendered to sleep. Festivals and rituals were often tied to the cycles of the moon, not just for their symbolic significance, but for the practical reality that a full moon offered safety and visibility. Farmers, for instance, sometimes relied on its light to continue late harvests, and travelers preferred to set out under its glow rather than risk stumbling through new terrain in utter darkness. Yet the moon was fickle. When clouds drifted across its face, its light vanished, and with each waning phase, nights grew darker until the new moon left the world in near total obscurity. Ancient peoples understood this rhythm and wove it into their lives. Lunar calendars became the measure of months, and rituals were aligned to its waxing and waning. To the Sumerians and Babylonians, the moon was not simply a rock reflecting sunlight. It was a deity, Sin or Nana, whose cycles influenced fertility, tides, and time itself. Its regularity offered assurance in a world where so much felt uncertain. Stars, too, served as silent companions. In the countryside, far from the smoke and faint flicker of scattered fires, the heavens appeared in overwhelming numbers. People learned to trace patterns among them, constellations that became stories, guides, and markers. The Greeks named Orion, Cassiopeia, and the Great Bear, weaving myths into the shapes of stars. These patterns were more than decoration. They were tools for navigation. A shepherd might use the position of the Pleiades to know the time of night, or a sailor might follow Polaris, the North Star, to stay on course across darkened seas. Long before compasses, the sky was the original map. The movement of stars across the sky also told the passage of time. Without clocks, people learned to note which constellations rose in the east and which fell toward the west. Entire systems of timekeeping relied on the rotation of the heavens, giving structure to activities even when the earth lay hidden in shadow. Monuments like Stonehenge or the pyramids in Egypt reflect not only the importance of the sun, but also a deep awareness of the night sky. Alignments with solstices and constellations remind us that the stars were both sacred and practical to ancient eyes. But the sky was more than a tool. It was a canvas for imagination. Myths of creation and destruction unfolded in the heavens, and each star was often thought to be a god, an ancestor, or a spirit watching from above. In Polynesian traditions, stars were critical for ocean voyaging, but they were also seen as companions on long journeys, living beings who offered comfort to sailors navigating across vast, empty seas. To the Egyptians, the Milky Way was sometimes imagined as a river in the sky, mirroring the Nile below. To others, it was the path of souls, a reminder of the mysteries that lay beyond earthly life. There is a quiet intimacy in imagining our ancestors lying awake at night, gazing upward. Without electricity or artificial light to dim the stars, the heavens were overwhelming in their brilliance. A child might have learned to pick out a constellation by sitting beside a parent, listening as they told the stories hidden among the lights. These tales served as both entertainment and education, anchoring the child in a shared cultural understanding of the universe. The constellations became memory aids too, helping people recall when to plant, when to harvest, when to migrate, and when to prepare for seasonal change. The moon and stars also shaped emotions. A full moon could inspire awe, a sense of safety, and even joy as it lit up fields and paths. It could also inspire unease, its brightness making shadows deeper, its pale glow casting familiar faces in unfamiliar ways. The stars, countless and eternal, could make humanity feel small, yet connected to something greater. Darkness might be intimidating, but the heavens reminded people that they were not alone. Each culture projected its fears and hopes onto the sky, making it not only a guide for navigation, but also a mirror for the soul. Yet as much as the moon and stars offered guidance, they were not always reliable. Clouds could blot out the heavens, storms could roll in without warning, and even the brightest constellations could be hidden for days or weeks at a time. In those moments, humanity was thrown back into the raw, impenetrable darkness of the earth below. Fires and torches were the only recourse, small defenses against the vast unknown. This unreliability may have deepened the reverence people held for the clear, starry nights when the heavens revealed themselves. To stand beneath a sky free of clouds was to feel blessed, protected, and connected to forces beyond human control. The influence of the night sky stretched into religion and philosophy. Philosophers in ancient Greece pondered the heavens as evidence of divine order, their consistent patterns suggesting a universe governed by reason and purpose. In China, astrologers read the movements of stars and planets as signs of the emperor's fortune, interpreting celestial changes as reflections of earthly destiny. To the Mayans, the moon and stars played central roles in calendars that governed agriculture, ritual, and daily life. These connections illustrate how deeply the night sky shaped not only practical navigation, but also humanity's understanding of existence itself. Even in societies where travel was rare and most people remained within their villages, the stars were ever present. They provided a sense of stability, a cosmic rhythm that gave reassurance amidst the uncertainties of earthly life. The predictability of the moon's cycles, the return of constellations with each season, and the steady glow of Polaris were anchors in a world where much was unpredictable and dangerous. The heavens were constant when the earth was not. To imagine life before lanterns is to picture a world where the sky was not just a backdrop, but an active presence in daily existence. The moon was a lamp that shifted its brightness through the month, and the stars were 1,000 tiny flames, always present for those who took the time to look upward. In a sense, the heavens provided a universal form of light, one available to all, regardless of wealth or status. Unlike candles or oil lamps, which required resources, the stars belonged to everyone, a shared inheritance passed down through the ages. And so, in the long stretches of night, when fires burned low and silence fell over the land, people found their orientation and their courage not only in the flames before them, but in the luminous expanse above. The moon and stars were guides through darkness, storytellers of the sky, and companions to those who braved the shadowed hours. They lit the way forward, not with the steady glow of lanterns, but with the ancient, eternal brilliance of the cosmos. Long before lanterns, and even before the widespread use of candles and oil lamps, the most immediate and practical tool for pushing back the dark was fire carried in the hand. The torch, sometimes called a firebrand when made hastily, was one of humanity's first portable lights. It was simple, primal, and powerful, yet also unreliable and demanding. To carry a torch was to walk with a living flame, one that illuminated the path just far enough to keep dangers at bay, but always threatened to sputter out, leaving its bearer stranded in the blackness. A torch could be made in many ways, depending on the resources at hand. In the simplest form, a branch might be set alight, its resin or sap feeding the flame for a short while. In more developed versions, cloth was wrapped around the end of a stick, soaked in animal fat or plant oils, and ignited to produce a brighter, longer-lasting fire. Some communities learned to use pine knots or bundles of reeds, their natural oils burning hot and bright. The quality of a torch depended on the skill of its maker and the fuel available. A well-prepared torch might last for an hour or more, while a crude one could gutter and die within minutes, leaving its holder scrambling to relight it. Carrying a torch was not without its hazards. The heat was intense, and the flame could drip sparks or molten fat onto hands, clothes, or the ground below. A torch might flare unexpectedly in a gust of wind or send smoke into the eyes, half blinding the very person who relied upon it for sight. Yet despite these risks, it was indispensable. For those who ventured outside at night, farmers checking on livestock, guards patrolling village perimeters, or travelers making their way along rough roads, the torch was a lifeline. Its circle of light became a small island of safety in a sea of darkness. But that circle was small indeed. The glow of a torch barely reached more than a few paces in any direction. Beyond that, shadows pressed in, and every sound seemed magnified by the uncertainty that lay beyond the flame. A snapping twig or the rustle of unseen movement could freeze a person in place, reminding them of how fragile their protection truly was. Unlike the steady glow of a lantern, the torch flickered wildly, throwing strange shapes across walls, rocks, or trees. These shapes could confuse the eye, turning harmless branches into threatening figures and adding a layer of unease to any nighttime journey. Torches were also bound to the constant need for fuel. Once extinguished, they left behind nothing but charred wood, and a new one had to be lit from an existing fire. This dependence created rituals around fire itself. In many villages, the communal hearth was never allowed to die, for it served as the source from which torches could be lit each evening. Losing the fire meant losing the ability to carry light into the night, and so keeping the flame alive became both a practical and spiritual duty. The torch's glow also held symbolic meaning across cultures. In ceremonies and rituals, torches were used not only for illumination, but also as symbols of life, guidance, and the triumph of light over darkness. Processions carrying torches through the streets or around sacred spaces created an atmosphere both solemn and awe-inspiring. In Greece, torches were central to festivals like the Panathenea, where races were held to see who could carry a flame fastest without letting it go out, a contest that reflected humanity's struggle to hold onto light itself. In Rome, torches accompanied weddings, symbolizing the new household fire that the bride would bring with her. The physical necessity of carrying fire became inseparable from its symbolic associations with hope, knowledge, and renewal. In more practical settings, torches served as signals. A torch waved from a hilltop could send a message to those watching from afar, whether warning of danger, calling for help, or marking the progress of travelers. In fortresses and watchtowers, firebrands became part of a system of communication, their glow cutting through the night to carry meaning over distances where words could not. In this way, fire was more than a personal guide. It was also a tool for community and defense. Yet torches could not erase the dangers of night. Bandits knew that a solitary flame moving in the distance meant a traveler was near, making it easier to set ambushes. Wild animals might shy away from fire, but others, like wolves, were curious enough to stalk from just beyond the ring of light. To carry a torch was to reveal one's presence as much as to protect it, turning the bearer into both hunter and hunted. This duality, protection and exposure, was ever present in the act of lighting the night. Firebrands, the simpler cousins of torches, were often used when a quick makeshift light was needed. A length of wood pulled from the hearth might serve long enough to cross a yard, tend to animals, or step outside briefly. These flames were short-lived, but they symbolized the intimate relationship between household fire and human activity. A firebrand was not meant for journeys or rituals. It was a humble, practical solution to a momentary need. In this way, firebrands connected the larger, ceremonial use of torches with the daily life of ordinary people. For those who lived before lanterns, the experience of walking at night with a torch was layered with sensory impressions. The crackle of burning wood, the hiss of sap, the shifting shadows, the smell of smoke and resin, these details imprinted themselves on memory. Every step was accompanied by the awareness that the flame was both fragile and essential. One careless movement, one sudden gust of wind, and the bearer could be plunged into darkness with nothing but the faint embers of a stick in hand. Still, torches gave a kind of confidence that nothing else could. They provided not only light, but also warmth, a psychological comfort that reached deeper than their physical glow. To hold a torch was to feel in control of at least a small piece of the night. It may not have banished the darkness entirely, but it reminded humanity that they were not helpless. With fire, they could move forward, see the path, and push back against the fears that lurked just beyond sight. Looking back, the torch and firebrand might seem crude compared to the refined lanterns and lamps that came later, but their importance cannot be overstated. They were humanity's first attempts to take the sun as gift of fire and carry it into the darkness, to make night less absolute. Each torch lit was an act of defiance against the void, a small declaration that people would not be ruled entirely by the cycles of light and dark. They might stumble, they might fear, but with a burning branch in hand, they carved a fragile line of safety through the night. And so, the story of torches and firebrands is not only one of practicality, but also of courage. Every flame carried in the hand was a reminder of human resilience, of the determination to endure the dangers of night and continue moving forward. It was a balance of risk and necessity, of fear and hope, and in its glow we see one of the earliest chapters in the long history of humankind's battle to master the dark. When the sun disappeared and the torchlight outside gave way to silence, the hearth within the home or the shared fire at the center of a community became the heart of life in the dark. For countless generations, fire was not merely a source of light and heat, it was the anchor of existence, the difference between safety and exposure, nourishment and hunger, company and isolation. Before lanterns, before the steady glow of candles and lamps became common, the hearth fire was the true center of the night, the glowing reminder that darkness could be kept at bay so long as flames were fed and guarded. Inside a home, the hearth was rarely allowed to die. To let it go cold was to risk a struggle in relighting it, for sparks could be hard to coax from flint and tinder, and dry wood might not always be close at hand. Families treated the fire as a member of the household, tended with care, shielded from drafts, and revived each morning with patience. Often, a bed of coals was covered in ash overnight to preserve its heat, ready to be stirred back into flame at dawn. In this way, the hearth became a living presence, its glowing embers a quiet reassurance through the darkest hours. The hearth's light was modest, but in the pitch black of ancient nights, it was enough. Its circle of glow illuminated the faces of family members gathered close, turning shadows into comfort rather than fear. Meals were prepared by its warmth, stories shared in its flickering light, and prayers whispered as the fire cracked inside. For many cultures, the hearth was sacred. In Greece, the goddess Hestia embodied the flame at the heart of the home, and no household was complete without her presence. In Rome, Vesta filled the same role, and the Vestal Virgins tended her eternal fire in the city's temple, ensuring Rome itself would never be plunged into darkness. Beyond the individual household, communal fires played an equally vital role. In villages, a great fire might be kept in the square or near the meeting place, a flame watched over by chosen keepers. It was from this fire that households could rekindle their own hearths if theirs went out. The communal flame was more than convenience. It symbolized unity, the bond between neighbors who shared both vulnerability and strength in the face of night. Gathering around this fire was a social act. Conversations stretched long after the day's labor ended. Children listened to the wisdom of elders, and laughter mingled with the crackle of wood. The fire transformed the darkness from threat into opportunity, a time for community rather than solitude. The glow of a hearth or communal fire also extended protection. Animals feared flames, and so the boundary of light became a circle of safety. Wolves prowling at the edge of villages would often turn back when confronted with firelight, and smaller creatures kept to the shadows. In this sense, the fire was not only warmth and companionship, but also a guard against the unseen dangers of the dark. It gave humanity a measure of control over the wilderness that otherwise pressed in from all directions. The keeping of fire required skill and constant attention. Wood had to be gathered in the daylight, dried, and stacked carefully to ensure it would last the night. Sparks had to be coaxed from flint or from smoldering tinder if the flame faltered. Children were taught from an early age how to blow gently on embers, how to arrange kindling so it caught quickly, and how to respect the power of fire. A careless ember could just as easily bring destruction as safety, and stories of fires consuming homes or spreading through villages reinforced the reverence and caution people held for flame. There was also a rhythm to life, shaped by the communal fire. Seasonal festivals were marked by great bonfires, often lit at liminal times of the year: solstices, harvests, and planting seasons, when the boundary between light and dark was thought to be especially thin. In Celtic lands, fires were lit on Beltane to protect herds and fields, while in other traditions, torches from sacred fires were carried home to renew domestic hearths. The symbolism was always clear. The flame linked people to one another, to the earth, and to forces greater than themselves. Within the home, the hearth was equally spiritual. It was often seen as a bridge between the living and the ancestors, its smoke carrying prayers upward, its warmth binding generations together. Many cultures made offerings into the fire, whether bits of food, oil, or incense, believing the flame could carry messages to gods or spirits. The steady glow reassured families that they were watched over, that their home was blessed and protected against the uncertainties of night. But beyond ritual, the hearth's practical role was never forgotten. It was the source of light to find one's way in the darkness of a single-room dwelling, the place where food could be warmed in the dead of night, and the spot where weary bodies gathered for comfort. The hearth fire dictated the boundaries of waking hours. Its fading embers signaled the time to sleep, while its morning revival marked the start of the day. In a world without lanterns or electricity, fire itself was the clock that measured time. For those who lived in larger settlements, the communal fire carried additional layers of meaning. It became the place where decisions were made, disputes settled, and stories passed down. Elders spoke by its glow, guiding younger generations with lessons wrapped in tales. Travelers arriving after dark might find welcome there, their faces lit by the same flame that warmed the community. In this way, the communal fire represented not only survival, but also belonging. No one was entirely alone, so long as the flame burned in the village square. To sit by such a fire was to experience both vulnerability and strength. The surrounding darkness reminded everyone of what lay beyond the forests, the beasts, the thieves, the spirits, but the glow of the flame reassured them that together they could endure. It was a balance of fear and comfort, a reminder that while humans could not banish darkness entirely, they could create small islands of safety within it. Over time, as candles, lamps, and lanterns became more common, the hearth and communal fire remained central. Even when portable light spread, the fire at the heart of the home retained its symbolic power. People still gathered around it, still told stories in its glow, and still treated it as the soul of the household. The eventual rise of lanterns did not erase the importance of the hearth. It only expanded humanity's ability to carry fire further into the dark. In truth, the hearth and communal flame were not simply about light. They were about connection. Fire connected people to each other, to their ancestors, to their gods, and to the natural rhythms of day and night. It demanded care, rewarded attention, and punished neglect. It turned the emptiness of darkness into a place of warmth, conversation, and shared memory. Long before lanterns became the companions of travelers and workers, fire was the companion of humanity itself, a steadfast guardian that kept the night from swallowing the world entirely. And so, as we imagine our ancestors sitting close to glowing embers, listening to the murmur of voices and the pop of burning wood, we glimpse the heart of ancient life in the dark. The hearth was not just practical necessity. It was the center of existence, the flame around which humanity gathered to survive, to remember, and to dream. When night fell and the world descended into shadow, humans were reminded of their limits. Unlike many of the creatures that shared their environment, people were not built for the dark. Their eyes strained against the blackness, their ears caught unfamiliar sounds, and their sense of smell did little to guide them through unseen paths. The darkness sharpened awareness of how fragile human perception was, and in that awareness came a natural envy for the animals who moved with ease when the sun was gone. To live before lanterns was to live in constant comparison to the natural world, to watch how wolves, owls, cats, and countless other creatures thrived at night, while humans huddled by their fires, cautious and vulnerable. Consider the owl, a silent hunter gliding through the night. Its eyes, enormous in proportion to its head, gathered the faintest traces of light, allowing it to see prey that humans could never detect. Its wings, shaped to muffle sound, carried it silently through forests and fields, striking down mice and insects in near total darkness. For humans, the owl became a symbol of wisdom and mystery, a creature bound to the night. Yet the awe it inspired also carried a hint of unease. To hear its call in the deep hours reminded people of their own shortcomings, their inability to move unseen and unafraid through the dark. Cats, too, became models of night vision. Domestic cats slinking through villages or wildcats, prowling fields, seemed to possess an uncanny ability to see what humans could not. Their reflective eyes gleamed in firelight, glowing with an otherworldly intensity that made them both cherished companions and objects of superstition. People noticed how cats navigated paths without hesitation, how they stalked through shadows with grace, and they recognized that these small creatures enjoyed an advantage denied to their masters. The cat's ease in darkness became both a source of comfort keeping rodents at bay and a reminder of how clumsy and blind humans could feel after sunset. Predators like wolves heightened this sense of contrast. A wolf's howl carried far into the night, a chilling reminder that while humans stumbled with torches and feared tripping over unseen roots, the wolf roamed confidently, guided by sharp senses of smell and hearing. In groups, wolves communicated across distances with ease, coordinating hunts under moonlight. For communities living on the edges of wilderness, the presence of such predators was terrifying. To hear movement in the brush or the low growl of unseen animals was enough to send people scurrying back toward the safety of fire. They understood instinctively that in the contest between human and beast, the dark tipped the balance in favor of the predator. Even smaller animals demonstrated abilities that humans lacked. Bats, for example, darted through night skies, their squeaks and clicks forming an invisible map of the world through echolocation. To early observers, bats seemed uncanny, creatures that could fly in complete darkness without colliding into trees or walls. Their strange abilities contributed to legends of shapeshifters and spirits, but they also deepened humanity's awareness of its limitations. While bats traced unseen paths with sound, people were left to stumble and rely on dim firelight. The human body did try to compensate. Eyes adjusted slowly to darkness, pupils widening to take in more light. Hearing sharpened, making distant footsteps or rustling leaves seem more pronounced. Smell and touch, too, took on heightened importance, with people using their hands to feel along walls or relying on the familiar sense of hearth and home to orient themselves. But even with these adaptations, humans were never creatures of the night. Their senses, dulled in comparison to the animals around them, forced them to depend on tools, fire, and community. This reliance gave rise to admiration for animals that thrived after dusk. Many myths elevated nocturnal creatures into symbols of the divine or supernatural. In ancient Egypt, the jackal, prowling at night, became associated with Anubis, god of the afterlife. Owls in Greece were tied to Athena, representing wisdom born of seeing what others could not. In other traditions, animals active at night were feared, believed to be messengers of death or omens of misfortune. These interpretations reflected both respect and fear, a recognition that animals were masters of a domain where humans struggled to survive. Daily life reflected these contrasts. Farmers knew that their livestock were vulnerable at night, not only because thieves might strike, but also because predators moved easily in the darkness. Chickens and sheep, lacking defenses, had to be secured before dusk. Dogs became essential companions, their keener senses offering early warnings of threats humans could not detect. A bark at night might startle a family, but it also provided reassurance that something had been noticed, something beyond human perception. In this way, domesticated animals bridged the gap, lending their natural advantages to human households. The envy of animal senses also inspired attempts to imitate them. People learned to move quietly, to rely on sound rather than sight, to memorize the feel of paths beneath their feet. Hunters sometimes trained themselves to sit for long hours in the dark, listening for subtle movements, learning patience from the nocturnal predators they sought to outwit. While no human could match the senses of an owl or wolf, practice and familiarity offered partial compensation. Communities developed traditions of moving in silence, of listening to the chorus of insects, frogs, and birds, and of interpreting these sounds as signs of approaching danger or change in weather. Still, there was no escaping the sense of vulnerability. To live in a world without lanterns was to recognize every night how dependent humans were on fire, on one another, and on luck. The awareness of animal superiority in darkness was a humbling reminder of humanity's fragile place in nature. It also reinforced bonds within communities. Alone, a person in the dark was exposed. Together, with a circle of fire and the support of dogs or other animals, they could find some measure of security. Night was not only the realm of animals, it was also the space where human cooperation mattered most. Stories told by the fire often reflected this relationship. Folktales described cunning animals who moved at night, some as helpers, others as tricksters or threats. These stories served as both entertainment and instruction, teaching children to respect the dangers of the dark and to admire the creatures who thrived within it. Over time, these narratives reinforced cultural identities, blending practical observation with myth. They acknowledged both the weakness of humans and the enduring will to survive despite those weaknesses. There is something deeply human about this contrast. It reveals the mixture of fear, envy, and creativity that shaped how people experienced night. They did not merely lament their poor eyesight or limited hearing. They transformed these shortcomings into stories, rituals, and innovations. The animals of the night became guides in imagination, inspiring both reverence and determination. If humans could not see as owls did, they could light torches. If they could not smell as wolves did, they could train dogs. If they could not fly like bats, they could at least learn patience and observation. In every case, the contrast between animal and human senses pushed people to adapt, to find solutions, and to carve out spaces of safety where none naturally existed. Thus, the dark was not only a reminder of what humans lacked, but also of what they could create. Every flicker of fire, every story whispered, every bond of community was shaped by the knowledge that they were not masters of the night. The animals were, and in watching them move with such ease, people found both humility and inspiration. To picture the ancient night is to see not only humans gathered around fires, but also the gleam of eyes in the distance, the soft hoot of an owl, the padding of wolves, the quiet rustle of cats in the shadows. It was a shared world, one where humanity's weakness and animals' strengths intertwined. And while people might never match those senses, they learned to live alongside them, crafting light and meaning in the spaces where their own perception faltered. As human ingenuity grew, so too did the ways people sought to hold back the night. Beyond the hearth, beyond the flickering torch, came the candle, a modest invention that carried profound importance. Though simple in design, a wick encased in a slow-burning substance, candles transformed life after sunset. They offered steadier light than a firebrand, portability greater than the hearth, and intimacy unmatched by larger flames. To light a candle was to carve out a personal circle of safety, warmth, and focus within the endless expanse of darkness. Candles could be made from different materials, depending on wealth and geography, and this choice shaped who could afford them and how they were used. The most common type for ordinary people was the tallow candle. Tallow, rendered animal fat, was plentiful and relatively easy to produce. A wick of twisted fiber was dipped repeatedly into melted fat, each layer building upon the last until a usable candle formed. These candles were functional, but they burned with a smoky, uneven flame, often giving off a sharp, unpleasant odor. Their light was weak and inconsistent, flickering with drafts and sputtering when impurities in the fat caused the flame to flare. For the poor, however, tallow candles represented a precious extension of the day, a way to finish small tasks or to share a meal without stumbling in darkness. By contrast, beeswax candles were a luxury. They burned cleanly, with a brighter, steadier flame, and a sweet scent that filled rooms with gentle comfort rather than acrid smoke. Beeswax was more difficult to obtain, requiring careful harvesting from hives and significant labor. As a result, beeswax candles were reserved for the wealthy, for sacred spaces, and for moments of special significance. In churches and temples, they lined altars and illuminated icons, their steady glow symbolizing divine presence and purity. In noble households, they lent elegance to evening gatherings, casting a golden light that flattered both architecture and face. To burn beeswax was to display status, but it was also to invite a different kind of atmosphere, one in which the darkness seemed less oppressive and more enchanting. The act of lighting a candle was itself ritualistic. A taper touched to a flame, a brief moment of hesitation, and then the wick caught, the small glow pushing outward to reveal the space. The flame was fragile at first, wavering against drafts or careless breath, but as it steadied, it became both tool and symbol. In many cultures, candles were tied to prayer, remembrance, and ceremony. Lighting a candle was an offering, a way to hold hope against uncertainty. A single flame could stand for a soul, a wish, or a memory, its glow extending beyond the practical into the spiritual. For daily life, however, candles were precious and not to be wasted. In many households, they were rationed carefully. Families might light a single candle to share, gathering close so all could benefit from its small circle of brightness. Children might be told to finish tasks quickly before the flame was extinguished, while adults measured each candle's worth against the labor and resources required to make more. Entire evenings were planned around the availability of candles, and when supplies dwindled, darkness returned without negotiation. The uneven distribution of candles created a divide between classes. In wealthy homes, rooms might be filled with multiple flames, casting a steady, welcoming glow long into the night. For the poor, however, even tallow candles might be scarce, and evenings often ended with the setting sun, except for the glow of a hearth or the embers of a communal fire. This disparity shaped how people experienced night. For some, it was softened by warmth and light. For others, it remained stark and unyielding. Despite their limitations, candles allowed humanity to push deeper into the hours once surrendered entirely to sleep. They illuminated manuscripts for monks copying texts late into the night, their steady focus creating the libraries of knowledge we inherit today. They lit workshops where craftsmen could extend their labor, spinning, weaving, or carving by dim glow. They gave scholars and writers the means to pursue thoughts beyond daylight, expanding human understanding in the quiet solitude of darkness. The small circle of a candle's light became a cradle of creativity, where imagination bloomed while the rest of the world slumbered. Yet candles also held dangers. Left unattended, they could tip and set fire to rush mats, wooden walls, or curtains, their gentle flame becoming a roaring disaster within moments. Entire towns were sometimes threatened by such accidents, and strict rules often governed their use in crowded places. The balance between necessity and risk was constant. A candle could be salvation in one moment, catastrophe in the next. People learned to respect them, to shield them in holders, and to treat their glow with the reverence due to something both fragile and powerful. The symbolism of candles grew alongside their practical role. In Christianity, they became central to rituals of devotion, representing the eternal light of faith. In other cultures, candles marked births, deaths, and sacred festivals, their flames carrying prayers upward like whispered hopes. Even outside religion, the candle came to symbolize resilience, the idea that a small flame could withstand the vast darkness. To sit by a candle was to feel that human presence mattered, that the night did not have to be overwhelming. The difference between tallow and beeswax also reflected the broader human experience of night. For most, the night was endured with minimal light, its dangers and silences pressing in. For a few, night was softened by luxury, their halls filled with golden glow. Yet whether humble or refined, all who used candles shared in the same essential experience: the fragile, comforting glow of fire held in miniature, the ability to carry light into the dark in a way both personal and profound. Imagine, then, a family huddled around a single tallow candle, the flame sputtering as it illuminates rough-hewn faces and casts long shadows on the wall. The air smells faintly of smoke. The children whisper as they rub their eyes, and the parents speak softly, careful not to waste the moment. Contrast that with the banquet hall of a noble, where beeswax flames flicker in golden sconces, filling the room with warmth and brilliance as music plays and guests laugh freely. These two images, so different in detail, both speak to the candle's role as mediator between humanity and the dark. The invention and refinement of candles marked a turning point in the human relationship with night. They were not yet lanterns, not yet the widespread illumination that would one day transform societies, but they were a bridge between dependence on great fires and the ability to hold a small, steady flame in one's hand. They allowed people to see not only the world around them, but also their own potential to work, to learn, to worship, and to dream after the sun was gone. And so, in the long history of light, the candle occupies a cherished place. Whether humble tallow or refined beeswax, whether smoky or sweet, it gave humanity the gift of extending life into darkness, of making night a little less vast and a little more human. Each flame was a promise, fragile yet enduring, that the dark would never have the final word. As centuries passed, the flickering torch and the humble candle were joined by another innovation that changed the experience of night: the oil lamp. Simple yet ingenious, the oil lamp represented a new step in humanity's effort to tame the darkness. Where firebrands sputtered and candles guttered, the oil lamp offered steadiness. Where the hearth anchored the home, the lamp could be carried, placed, and used in ways that extended human activity into hours once surrendered entirely to the dark. Its glow was faint by modern standards, but in the world before lanterns, it was nothing less than transformative. The principle of the oil lamp was straightforward. A small vessel, often clay in its earliest forms, held a reservoir of oil. A wick, fashioned from twisted plant fibers or bits of linen, was placed so that one end rested in the oil, while the other protruded slightly above the rim. When lit, the flame drew oil upward, burning slowly and steadily. This simple design made it practical, efficient, and versatile. Lamps could be small enough to fit in the palm of a hand or large enough to illuminate a room. They could be plain and functional, or richly decorated with patterns, figures, or inscriptions that reflected the artistry of their makers. The type of oil mattered greatly. In Mediterranean regions, olive oil was most common. It burned cleanly, producing a gentle, steady flame that gave a warm yellow light. Where olives were scarce, other oils were used: sesame in parts of Asia, fish oil in coastal areas, even nut or seed oils when available. Each fuel carried its own scent and quality of flame. Olive oil, in particular, became synonymous with light, not only because of its practical use, but also because of its symbolic associations with peace, blessing, and abundance. To pour oil into a lamp was to draw upon both nature-esque gifts and centuries of tradition. Oil lamps illuminated temples, homes, and streets in ways that reshaped the rhythm of life. In households, they allowed people to cook, weave, and converse after sunset with greater ease than by torch or tallow candle. In sacred spaces, they burned as offerings to the gods, their continuous flames representing devotion and divine presence. In some cities, lamps were placed along thoroughfares, faintly lighting the busiest roads. Though the light they offered was still weak by modern standards, for those who had only known fire and darkness, it was a remarkable expansion of possibility. The glow of an oil lamp was unlike the wild dance of torchlight. It was steadier, calmer, less prone to smoke and sudden flares. To sit by an oil lamp was to be wrapped in a soft, intimate light that encouraged reflection and quiet tasks. Monks and scribes hunched over parchment by such flames, painstakingly copying words that would outlast empires. Artisans used the glow to extend their hours of work, chiseling, carving, or sewing by lamplight. Families gathered around the small pool of brightness, their conversations and silences framed by the soft golden circle. The lamp's glow carried a gentleness that firebrands could not offer, a quiet presence that shaped both atmosphere and imagination. Yet, like all light before lanterns, lamps carried limitations. Oil had to be supplied constantly, and it was not always easy to come by. Poor families often rationed their use carefully, lighting a lamp only for essential tasks. The wealthy, by contrast, might burn lamps liberally, filling their homes with multiple flames. This divide deepened the sense of inequality. The ability to banish darkness, even temporarily, became another marker of status. A home with many lamps glowing after sunset appeared prosperous and secure, while those who relied on a single dim flame, or none at all, remained tied more closely to the rhythm of night. There were dangers, too. A lamp knocked over could spill oil, feeding fire that might consume wooden beams, mats, or clothing. Smoke, though less than that of tallow candles, could still leave marks on walls and ceilings, darkening spaces over time. Care had to be taken in handling and placing lamps, and their small flames required constant vigilance. Still, compared to earlier methods, the benefits outweighed the risks, and lamps spread widely across cultures. The symbolism of oil lamps deepened alongside their practical use. In Jewish tradition, the eternal flame of the menorah burned within the temple, its seven-branch design echoing the cosmic order. In Christian ritual, oil lamps represented the presence of God, their unbroken flames a sign of spiritual vigilance. In Hindu households and temples, the lighting of lamps marked the triumph of light over darkness, wisdom over ignorance, hope over despair. These associations made the oil lamp more than just a tool. It was a vessel of meaning, a bridge between the human and the divine. Imagine for a moment walking through the streets of an ancient city after dusk. The sky is dark, the air filled with the muted sounds of voices, animals, and distant music. In niches along the road, small clay lamps flicker, each one casting a modest circle of light. Their glow does not banish the darkness entirely, but it outlines the path, marks the way forward, and reassures the traveler that civilization holds firm even at night's edge. The lamps are fragile, their flames easily extinguished, yet together they create a patchwork of light that transforms the city into something livable after sunset. In the privacy of a home, the lamp played a different role. A mother might tend it while children drifted into sleep, its flame watching over them like a guardian. A scholar might lean close, eyes straining over text as hours slipped by unnoticed. A craftsman might complete a piece of work by lamplight, the glow revealing details invisible in shadow. Each act was small, but together they formed a tapestry of human persistence, of the refusal to surrender entirely to the cycles of nature. The oil lamp extended the day, offering people time to pray, to learn, to create, and to dream. Even the act of refilling a lamp became a kind of ritual. A small jug of oil was poured carefully, the wick adjusted, the flame trimmed. These small gestures carried with them the weight of continuity, the sense that one was part of a long line of ancestors who had done the same. To keep the flame alive was not only practical, but also symbolic, a reminder that light must be nurtured constantly lest it falter. In this way, the oil lamp taught patience, attention, and reverence. The history of oil lamps is also a history of human craftsmanship. Archaeological discoveries reveal lamps of all shapes and designs, from plain, undecorated bowls to intricate works carved with images of animals, deities, or geometric patterns. Some were designed with multiple nozzles, each holding a wick, creating greater brightness at the cost of more oil. Others bore inscriptions, prayers, or blessings, turning each act of lighting into a sacred gesture. The diversity of these lamps reflects both the creativity and the devotion with which humans approach the challenge of living in darkness. Though oil lamps would one day give way to lanterns, gaslights, and electric bulbs, their role in shaping the night cannot be overstated. They offered a gentler, steadier light than anything before, a glow that encouraged not just survival, but reflection and creativity. Their flames burned in homes and temples, on streets and in tombs, illuminating the most ordinary tasks and the most sacred rituals alike. They were, in many ways, the first lights to make night not only bearable but beautiful. To imagine a world before lanterns is to see the humble oil lamp glowing against the dark, its flame steady, its light modest yet profound. It was a reminder that even in the vastness of night, humanity could hold a small, enduring glow, fragile, yes, but sufficient to carry them through until dawn. Darkness has always been more than the absence of light. For those who lived before lanterns and modern illumination, the fall of night transformed the world into a realm of uncertainty and risk. Daytime offered clarity, safety, and familiarity, but once the sun dipped below the horizon, every shadow became suspect, every sound seemed amplified, and every path turned into a labyrinth of potential threats. To live in such a world was to carry within oneself a deep respect and often a deep fear of what the night concealed. One of the most obvious dangers was the natural world itself. Predators were not idle once humans withdrew into their homes. Wolves prowled at the edges of villages, their eyes gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Large cats in some regions stalked prey with silent patience, and in more tropical areas, snakes and nocturnal hunters stirred to life when people were at their most vulnerable. For communities reliant on livestock, these dangers were constant. A sheep left outside its pen, or a chicken not secured within its coop, could easily fall victim to nighttime predators. The knowledge that the safety of food, livelihood, and life itself could be undone in the hours of darkness weighed heavily on every family. Yet animals were only part of the threat. Human beings, too, found cover in the night. Darkness made theft easier, violence more difficult to resist, and escape more likely. Ancient cities, despite their walls and watchmen, were not immune to crime. Robbers lurked in alleys, waiting for lone travelers whose small oil lamps or torches marked them as both cautious and vulnerable. Roads outside the city were even more perilous. Bandits could set upon travelers under the cover of blackness, leading few witnesses to tell the tale. It was not uncommon for travelers to wait until dawn to continue their journey, preferring exhaustion to the gamble of walking roads after dusk. Superstition magnified these fears. Where light was scarce, imagination thrived. Shadows shifting in torchlight could easily be seen as spirits, and unexplained noises became the voices of restless souls. Folklore across cultures is filled with tales of demons, ghosts, and creatures of the night, many of them serving as warnings not to stray from home after sunset. In Mesopotamia, spirits were thought to roam more freely once the sun god retreated. In European traditions, witches and fae were said to gather in the dark hours, influencing crops, animals, and even the health of neighbors. Whether or not people truly believed these stories in every detail, they gave shape to the fear that the night naturally inspired. There was also the danger of disorientation. Without landmarks visible in daylight, travelers and even villagers could lose their way just a few steps beyond familiar ground. A wrong turn on a moonless night could lead into marshes, cliffs, or forests filled with hazards. Falling into unseen ditches or stumbling over roots and stones was a constant risk, and injuries sustained in such conditions were often more serious than we might imagine today. Without steady light, a twisted ankle or a broken bone could spell disaster, isolating a person in a world where medical help was scarce. Fire, the very tool that offered protection, also posed danger. A candle knocked over, an oil lamp spilled, or a torch dropped could spark a blaze that consumed entire homes or villages. Thatched roofs, wooden beams, and straw floors burned quickly, and in tightly packed communities, one mistake could spread catastrophe. Thus, every act of carrying fire after dark carried with it a balance of safety and risk, a reminder that light itself had to be handled with care. Psychological dangers weighed just as heavily as physical ones. Darkness played upon the mind, amplifying loneliness, anxiety, and imagination. To sit awake while the household slept, listening to the groan of timbers or the cry of animals, was to feel the weight of vulnerability in every breath. Even familiar surroundings could feel uncanny when seen by the dim glow of embers. The brain, deprived of visual certainty, supplied its own explanations, many of them frightening. This heightened awareness kept people cautious, but it also deepened their dependence on one another. Few wished to face the dark alone. For those whose work forced them into the night, the dangers were unavoidable. Guards patrolled city walls, shepherds checked on flocks, and fishermen ventured into waters where the risk of storm or attack was amplified by the absence of light. Their courage was admired, but also pitied, for they bore the brunt of a world that others avoided whenever possible. Some societies honored such roles with ritual, acknowledging the sacrifices made by those who stood watch through the perilous hours. The night was dangerous, but it was also necessary, and someone had to face it. Yet it would be unfair to imagine that people lived only in dread. Alongside the dangers, the night also held opportunities. Lovers met in secret under cover of darkness. Rebels and dissidents gathered away from prying eyes, and hunters sometimes used the dark to their advantage. Even so, the risks outweighed the rewards for most. Night was a time for retreat, not advance, for caution rather than boldness. The very structure of daily life was built around the expectation that darkness meant danger, and thus activities were compressed into the hours of light. Communities developed ways to mitigate these risks. Watchmen were stationed at gates, curfews enforced to keep streets empty, and bells or horns sounded if danger was spotted. Dogs became guardians, their senses extending human awareness. Families told stories that instilled caution in children, ensuring they would not wander after dark. These strategies did not eliminate danger, but they created a framework that made the night survivable, if never entirely safe. The dangers of the night also shaped humanity's relationship with hope. Dawn was not merely the beginning of another day, it was a victory. Each sunrise symbolized safety restored, danger survived, and life renewed. The collective sigh of relief that greeted the morning was not simply habit. It was the product of countless generations who had endured nights filled with uncertainty and peril. To see the horizon lighten was to feel that the world had been handed back, that the terrors of the unseen had retreated once more. In this way, the night was both enemy and teacher. It reminded humanity of its fragility, its dependence on tools, fire, and companionship. It forced communities to adapt, to create rituals of safety, and to pass down wisdom about what not to do when the sun disappeared. The dangers were real wolves, thieves, accidents, and fire, but they were also psychological, woven into the very fabric of what it meant to be human in a world where light was scarce. To picture the dangers of the night in ancient times is to imagine a world poised on the edge of fear and resilience. The glow of a lamp or fire could hold the shadows at bay, but beyond its reach stretched a vast unknown filled with peril. Every sound, every shape, every absence of certainty carried weight. Yet humanity endured, learned, and adapted. The dangers never vanished, but neither did the will to face them. And in that balance, the long story of light and darkness unfolded, chapter by chapter, flame by flame. Inside the walls of a home, one might think the dangers of night diminished, but in the days before lanterns, even the household itself transformed after sunset. The familiar spaces of daylight became disorienting. Shadows stretched across walls, corners seemed to deepen into voids, and the smallest object left on the floor became an obstacle that could trip or bruise. To navigate one's own dwelling without light was an act of memory, patience, and instinct, a nightly ritual that revealed how dependent people were on senses beyond sight. For many families, homes were simple single-room dwellings with packed earth floors, wooden beams, and thatched or tiled roofs. By day, the layout was clear, everything visible and in its place. By night, once the hearth burned low and candles or lamps were rationed carefully, the house became a landscape of shapes and textures. People learned to rely on their knowledge of space, moving through it by feel rather than sight. They counted steps from door to bed, reached for familiar posts or walls, and developed a rhythm that allowed them to avoid hazards. A misplaced stool, however, could bring a stumble, and a toy left by a child might cause a fall. Small as these accidents might seem, they carried greater consequence in a world without modern medicine. The hearth provided a faint anchor. Its embers glowed dimly, sending out the softest light, enough to outline a shape nearby, but not enough to reveal the full room. Families arranged themselves around it carefully, knowing where bedding was spread and where supplies were stacked. Children slept close to parents, often sharing mats or blankets, their breathing mingling in the dark. To rise in the night to tend to livestock, to fetch water, or simply to step outside meant leaving that circle of faint glow and trusting memory to guide the way. Houses with multiple rooms or upper levels added complexity. Staircases steep and uneven became treacherous in the dark. Without railings or with only crude ones, a single misstep could send someone tumbling. Parents often instructed children never to climb stairs after sunset unless absolutely necessary, and adults themselves moved with extreme caution. In such households, people prepared before nightfall, bringing water, food, and bedding to the main living space to reduce the need for movement in the dark hours. Touch became the most reliable guide. Hands brushed along walls, found the edges of door frames, and located objects by feel. Bare feet on packed earth or wooden floors registered subtle changes, guiding people as much as sight might during the day. Some even used sound-counting heartbeats between steps or listening for echoes within a room to orient themselves. Navigating a home at night became a skill passed down through practice, much like any other survival technique. Not all homes were equally vulnerable. Wealthier households with access to more candles or oil lamps could afford greater comfort after dusk. Rooms might be lit during meals or gatherings, allowing easier movement. Servants sometimes carried small lamps to guide masters through corridors. In contrast, poorer families often relied solely on the fire's embers or perhaps a single tallow candle used sparingly. For them, night meant stillness. Movement was minimized to conserve resources and avoid mishaps. This difference once again highlighted the way wealth shaped not only comfort but safety in the hours of darkness. Cultural customs often grew around these limitations. In some traditions, it was considered unwise to rise from bed in the middle of the night without first whispering a prayer or blessing. This ritual offered comfort, but it also reflected practical caution, acknowledging the risks of moving through a house without light. In other places, families placed protective charms or symbols near doorways and windows, believing that unseen spirits might enter under cover of night. These practices intertwined the physical challenges of navigating darkness with the psychological and spiritual ones. Accidents inside the home were not the only concern. Fires used for light and warmth carried their own risks, and so careful management was essential. Lamps and candles were often extinguished before sleep to reduce the chance of disaster, leaving the house in near-total blackness. A stray ember might be covered with ash to preserve it, but also to keep it from sparking. Families balanced the need for safety against the desire for light, making every decision deliberate. Yet not every moment in the dark was filled with fear. The quiet of the house at night could also bring peace. Families gathered close, their bonds strengthened by the necessity of proximity. Children felt the comfort of parents nearby, and parents found reassurance in hearing their families breathe. Darkness fostered intimacy, both emotional and practical. It was in these hours that stories were told, whispers shared, and dreams slowly drifted into being. The absence of light made people depend on one another more deeply, finding security not in sight but in presence. Over time, navigating the home at night became so habitual that it hardly needed thought. People internalized the positions of objects, the creak of certain boards, the distance from hearth to bed. They learned to adjust to small shifts, to sense when something was out of place. These skills seem simple, but they reflect humanity's adaptability, the ability to find order even when deprived of one of its most important senses. If we imagine ourselves stepping into such a home, the experience becomes clear. You enter a room lit only by fading embers. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and straw. You move slowly, hand gliding along the rough wall, feet brushing the floor to avoid unseen objects. You know the bed is near, though you cannot see it. You hear the soft breathing of others, guiding you as much as the dim orange glow from the hearth. When you finally settle, the dark closes in, not hostile but complete, reminding you of how different the world feels without light. In this way, night inside the home was both challenge and teacher. It demanded caution, discipline, and memory. It reminded people of the fragility of their surroundings and the importance of preparation. It also brought them together, binding families through shared vulnerability. Lanterns would one day soften this reality, but before their arrival, the home itself was transformed each evening into a space navigated not by sight, but by trust, familiarity, and care. When the last rays of the sun slipped beyond the horizon, a village changed. The bustle of the day, the sounds of animals, children at play, the hammer of a blacksmith, the chatter of women at the well quieted into stillness. What remained was a rhythm shaped by firelight, by the hush of voices, and by the ever-present knowledge that darkness pressed just beyond the edges of the settlement. Village nights in the time before lanterns were both communal and cautious, filled with rituals that bound people together against the unknown. In many villages, the first sign of evening was the gathering around the communal fire. This great flame, kept alive with care, stood as the village's heart. Its glow flickered across the faces of neighbors, casting long shadows against huts or wooden fences. People came here not only for warmth, but for reassurance. Alone, the dark could feel overwhelming, but gathered together, villagers found safety in shared light. The fire's crackle mixed with low voices, with laughter, and sometimes with song. Around it, stories of ancestors, gods, and spirits were told, keeping tradition alive while also filling the hours until sleep. Curfews were common, whether formal or informal. As the night deepened, households withdrew to their own hearths. The ringing of a bell, the blowing of a horn, or simply the fading of the communal fire signaled that it was time to retreat. In some cultures, watchmen patrolled the streets, calling out the hours or announcing the weather. Their voices were not only practical but symbolic, a reminder that vigilance continued even when most were asleep. For those listening in their beds, the sound of a watchman's call was a thread of comfort weaving through the silence. The dangers of night did not end at the village edge. Thieves, raiders, or wild animals could still threaten the community, and so boundaries were marked carefully. Gates might be barred, and livestock brought into enclosures. Dogs patrolled the perimeters, their barking an alarm that drew neighbors quickly from their homes. Fires or torches were sometimes placed at key entrances to discourage intruders, their glow standing like sentinels against the blackness beyond. Even so, the night's uncertainty lingered. A rustle in the brush or the cry of an animal could send a ripple of unease through the settlement. Yet village nights were not only about fear. They were also times of connection. With the day's work completed, people had space for conversation, song, and quiet reflection. Young people sometimes gathered in secret places, away from the eyes of elders, sharing whispered confidences under the stars. Couples found privacy in the dark, their steps guided by memory and moonlight. Children, too restless to sleep, might be soothed by the murmur of voices outside or the gentle glow of the hearth inside. Darkness did not erase life. It simply reshaped it into a slower, more intimate rhythm. Festivals brought unique energy to village nights. Bonfires lit the fields, drums and flutes echoed against hills, and people danced long past the hours they normally surrendered to sleep. These events transformed the usual caution of night into celebration, making the darkness itself part of the ritual. Sparks rose into the sky like offerings, and the community, gathered close, felt both joy and strength in their unity. Such nights were rare but unforgettable, standing out in memory against the backdrop of countless quiet evenings. The sensory details of village nights were vivid. Smoke drifted from hearths, carrying the smell of charred wood and roasted food. The ground felt cool beneath bare feet, the air damp with dew settling in fields. Insects hummed, and in some regions, frogs and night birds added their voices to the chorus. Within homes, the creak of wood, the shuffle of bedding, and the sigh of sleeping bodies filled the silence. The night was never truly silent. It simply shifted from the noise of work to the whispers of life lived more slowly. Time itself felt different after sunset. Without clocks or steady light, hours stretched and contracted. Some nights seemed endless, the dark pressing heavily on weary minds. Others passed quickly, filled with quiet conversation or vivid dreams. The return of dawn was always a relief, yet the night had its own value. It taught patience, resilience, and the importance of community. To endure it was to be reminded of one's place in a larger whole dependent on neighbors, family, and the fragile circle of light they could create together. For travelers passing through, village nights offered a stark contrast to the dangers of roads and wilderness. To see the glow of a fire in the distance was to glimpse safety, to know that warmth and company awaited. Hospitality was often extended, for travelers brought news and stories, enriching the village's connection to the wider world. Sitting with strangers around the communal fire blurred the line between outsider and insider, creating bonds that lasted beyond the night itself. In some ways, the village at night mirrored the human condition itself. Small, fragile circles of light surrounded by vast darkness. Within the boundaries of fire and fellowship, people laughed, sang, prayed, and dreamed. Beyond those boundaries lay uncertainty, danger, and the unknown. Each night balanced these forces, reminding villagers of both their vulnerability and their resilience. To imagine such a night is to see a handful of huts or cottages clustered together, smoke rising gently into the starry sky, the glow of a single great fire drawing people close. Children drift to sleep on mats near their parents. Dogs patrol, ears pricked for sound. The watchman's call drifts through the still air, marking the passing hours. And in the quiet spaces between, the village breathes together, holding fast against the night. When we picture the great cities of the ancient world, Rome with its bustling forums, Athens with its philosophers and theaters, Babylon with its mighty walls, we often imagine them filled with life at all hours, as though their streets never slept. But in reality, once the sun set, even the greatest of cities surrendered to darkness. The shift from day to night in an urban center was dramatic, where thousands of people might crowd the streets by day, buying, selling, debating, or working. After dusk, the same streets became hushed, shadowed, and threatening. The absence of lanterns or streetlights meant that cities too were swallowed by the same darkness as villages, though magnified by their size and density. During the day, an ancient city was alive with sound and motion. Merchants hawked their wares, craftsmen labored in open workshops, and animals brayed and clattered along stone roads. But when the sun dipped behind the horizon, shutters closed, market stalls emptied, and the energy of the city retreated indoors. People understood that the streets after dark were dangerous, places where one risked theft, violence, or misfortune. Homes became fortresses of safety, doors barred, and only those with true necessity ventured into the blackness beyond. Torches and oil lamps provided some illumination, but these were scarce and expensive. Wealthy households might employ slaves or servants to carry lamps through the streets, but for ordinary citizens, such luxuries were beyond reach. A single flickering torch could not compete with the vast shadows of assiduous alleys and narrow lanes. Light reached only a few paces, leaving countless places for danger to hide. Even when torches were mounted along certain avenues or at city gates, they were too few to make the streets truly safe. For this reason, many ancient cities developed curfews or encouraged citizens to remain indoors once the sun fell. Criminal activity thrived in this environment. Thieves knew that darkness provided cover for their work, and drunken brawls often spilled into alleys where no authority could intervene. In Rome, where taverns and brothels operated deep into the night, the danger was magnified. Night watchmen patrolled, but their presence was limited, and their ability to stop violence or theft was uncertain. Many citizens feared them as much as they respected them, for some were known to exploit their position for bribes or intimidation. To walk the streets of Rome at midnight was an act of bravery, one that few would attempt without reason. The architecture of cities made night even more perilous. Narrow alleys twisted unpredictably, high walls blocked moonlight, and uneven paving stones threatened to trip unwary travelers. In some places, open drains or hidden wells became hazards, invisible in the dark. The urban environment, so familiar by day, turned into a maze of dangers once night descended. For women, the risks were multiplied, as the cover of darkness made them particularly vulnerable. Families often discouraged them from leaving home after dusk unless escorted, a restriction that reflected both cultural expectations and the practical realities of safety. Yet cities were not completely lifeless at night. Certain forms of activity thrived in the dark. Taverns, dens of gambling, and houses of pleasure often became busiest after sunset. These places catered to those willing to take the risks of the streets, their entrances lit faintly by torches or lamps. Inside, laughter, music, and argument filled the air, contrasting sharply with the silence outside. For some, these spaces offered escape from the rigid structures of daily life, though the journey there and back was always tinged with danger. The night also held importance for laborers whose work could not stop with the setting sun. Bakers in Rome, for example, often began their work in the small hours, preparing bread for the day ahead. Their ovens glowed faintly against the dark, marking them as some of the only places awake while the city slept. Nighttime laborers also included guards at city gates, soldiers on watch, and those tasked with maintaining fires or signals. These individuals formed a hidden backbone of the urban night, their efforts unseen by most but essential to the city's survival. Religion, too, shaped urban nights. Temples sometimes remained lit by oil lamps, their steady glow serving as both spiritual and practical reassurance. Pilgrims or worshippers might bring offerings at night, believing the hours of darkness held special meaning. In some traditions, the gods themselves were thought to move more freely under the cover of night, and prayers whispered in these hours carried unique power. To walk past a temple faintly illuminated in the midst of an otherwise blackened street was to feel both awe and comfort, a reminder that even in darkness, the divine was present. The sensory world of an ancient city at night was distinct. The din of daytime gave way to sporadic noises, dogs barking, footsteps echoing in a quiet lane, the distant cry of someone in distress. Smells shifted as well. The acrid scent of extinguished torches, the lingering odor of refuse left in streets, the faint sweetness of bread baking before dawn. The air itself seemed heavier, carrying with it both silence and menace. People learned to interpret these sensations with care, for survival depended as much on instinct as on preparation. The experience of urban darkness also depended greatly on class. The wealthy could afford better protection. Lamps, guards, and large households filled with people. Their compounds became self-contained worlds, glowing islands of security amidst the city's shadows. The poor, by contrast, lived in cramped quarters where even a single candle was a luxury. Their nights were longer, harsher, and more exposed. This divide shaped how different groups of people remembered and navigated the hours after sunset. Despite the risks, the urban night was not without beauty. The sky above, unpolluted by artificial light, revealed stars in numbers that modern city dwellers can scarcely imagine. The moon cast silver across rooftops, and quiet streets carried an almost otherworldly atmosphere. Poets and philosophers sometimes found inspiration in these hours, writing about the silence and stillness that came when the city finally rested. The same darkness that frightened many could also stir reflection, creativity, and wonder. To imagine an ancient city at night is to hold both realities together, the menace and the marvel, the danger and the dream. The streets were fraught with risk, yet they were also filled with possibility. The flicker of a lamp in a window, the distant murmur of voices from a tavern, the glow of a temple's eternal flame, all these details offered threads of light in a vast tapestry of shadow. Urban darkness was never absolute. It was always a balance between fear and resilience, vulnerability and adaptation. For those who lived in such cities, night was not simply a time to be endured. It was a test of vigilance, a measure of courage, and sometimes a source of inspiration. And in those long hours before lanterns transformed the urban night, every flame that burned was a fragile but defiant reminder that humanity would not surrender entirely to the dark. For most people in the ancient world, the fall of night signaled stillness. Roads emptied, fields grew silent, and villages retreated into the glow of their hearths. Yet sometimes necessity forced men and women onto paths after sunset. To travel in the dark was to step into a realm of uncertainty, where dangers multiplied and every sound became sharper. Before lanterns and reliable portable lights, moving through the night required courage, preparation, and more than a little luck. The risks of travel after sunset were clear to everyone. Roads that seemed familiar by day could become alien under a black sky. Without moonlight, a path might vanish entirely, leaving a traveler guessing which direction to take. Stones and roots became hidden traps. Ditches lurked unseen at the edges of the way, and streams or rivers could surprise the unwary with sudden splashes that turned to disaster. Even a simple stumble could prove catastrophic in an era without advanced medicine, leaving a traveler alone and injured with no help nearby. Bandits posed an even greater threat. Darkness offered them perfect cover, allowing ambush on lonely roads or at choke points such as bridges and narrow passes. A solitary torch or lamp could betray a traveler's position from far off, turning light into a beacon, not only for safety, but for predators, human and animal alike. Entire tales of robbery and betrayal were woven into folklore, serving as warnings not to take to the roads at night unless absolutely unavoidable. Still, there were times when travel after dark was necessary. Messengers carrying urgent news could not wait for dawn. Armies often moved under the cover of night to surprise enemies or to march more comfortably without the heat of the sun. Farmers, pressed by the demands of harvest or the needs of livestock, sometimes ventured out to fields even after sunset. For these purposes, strategies developed to reduce risk. Travelers often went in groups, carrying torches or firebrands, and sang or spoke loudly to reassure themselves and warn away wild animals. Moonlight was the greatest ally of the nocturnal traveler. On nights when the moon was full, fields and roads glowed silver, and movement was far less perilous. Ancient calendars often noted the phases of the moon, not only for agricultural purposes, but also for planning journeys. It was understood that traveling during the dark of the moon invited trouble, while journeys made under a bright lunar sky carried greater safety. Armies, too, planned their campaigns with the moon in mind, knowing that soldiers moved more confidently under its light. Stars also provided guidance, particularly in open landscapes or at sea. Sailors relied on constellations to navigate vast waters where no landmarks existed, and some overland travelers, too, learned to orient themselves by the heavens. Yet this knowledge was specialized, not available to everyone. For the majority, the loss of sunlight meant the loss of orientation, leaving them vulnerable to disorientation and delay. Superstitions reinforced caution. In many cultures, spirits were thought to wander freely at night, particularly in lonely places such as crossroads, forests, or ruins. Travelers whispered prayers or carried charms to protect themselves, hoping to ward off misfortune. Stories of ghostly apparitions or malevolent creatures were not only entertainment, but practical warnings to dissuade unnecessary movement after dark. The imagination, sharpened by fear, filled the shadows with unseen dangers, making every step heavier. Animals added to this unease. Wolves prowled roadsides, attracted by the scent of livestock or food carried by travelers. In warmer regions, snakes stirred in the coolness of evening. Even harmless creatures, an owl's sudden call, the rustle of a rabbit in the underbrush, could startle those already tense with fear. Without lanterns, there was no reliable way to distinguish friend from foe, threat from harmless noise, until it was often too late. Yet not all travel in the dark was grim. There were moments of wonder, too. The quiet of the night transformed familiar landscapes into something mysterious, even beautiful. The rustle of wind in trees, the shimmer of starlight on water, the sight of a village fire glowing in the distance, all of these could inspire awe. Poets and wanderers sometimes found in night travel a source of reflection, their senses sharpened by vulnerability, their hearts stirred by the vastness of the world around them. In this way, the same conditions that inspired fear also gave rise to reverence. Communities developed practical measures to support those who traveled after dark. Inns and way stations dotted busy routes, offering fire, food, and shelter for the weary. In some regions, beacons were lit on hills or towers, guiding travelers toward safety. Guards patrolled certain roads, though never enough to eliminate risk entirely. These measures did not make travel safe, but they created threads of reassurance for those who could not wait for dawn. The experience of traveling at night was profoundly shaped by social status. Wealthy travelers often moved with escorts, carrying multiple torches or lamps, and sometimes even guards to deter bandits. Poorer travelers had no such protection, relying instead on silence, stealth, and prayers. For them, night travel was often a desperate act fleeing danger, seeking urgent aid, or returning home too late from work. Their vulnerability was magnified, and their stories remind us that the night weighed heavier on some than others. The dangers of night travel also left their mark on language and culture. Crossroads became symbols of uncertainty and risk, places where choices could not be clearly seen. Proverbs warned against journeys after dusk, while myths often began with a traveler who ignored such warnings. The very idea of the dark road entered storytelling as a metaphor for risk, fear, and the unknown. To picture travel in the dark is to imagine a lone figure walking along a dirt path, torch flickering in the wind. The night is silent except for the crunch of footsteps and the occasional call of an animal. Shadows stretch and waver, and every bend in the road holds the possibility of danger. In the distance, perhaps, the faint glow of a fire promises safety, and each step forward becomes an act of courage. For all its risks, traveling in the dark revealed something essential about humanity. It showed resilience, the determination to move forward even when the world seemed hostile. It showed ingenuity, the use of moonlight, stars, and fire to carve a way through shadow. And it showed the enduring balance between fear and necessity, between the instinct to hide and the need to continue. Night travel was never easy, never without danger, but it was sometimes unavoidable. And in those journeys, humanity discovered both its limits and its strength. To live in a world where night was absolute, where shadows pressed close and every step carried uncertainty, was to give darkness a meaning beyond the physical. It was not only the absence of light, but a presence in itself, something powerful, mysterious, and deeply woven into the spiritual life of humanity. Across cultures, rituals arose to make sense of this overwhelming force, to harness it, to protect against it, and to honor what it revealed about life and death, gods and spirits, fear and hope. Darkness was often imagined as a realm belonging to the divine or supernatural. In Egypt, the setting of the sun was not merely the disappearance of daylight, but the beginning of the god Rea's nightly journey through the underworld. Each dusk signaled a cosmic battle, as Ra confronted serpents and spirits of chaos before being reborn at dawn. The darkness was therefore both threat and renewal, a reminder that survival required struggle, but also promised victory. Rituals that greeted dawn or bid farewell to the sun were ways of participating in this eternal cycle, linking human lives to cosmic rhythms. In Mesopotamia, night was tied to the underworld and to gods who governed death and shadow. Spirits were thought to roam more freely once the sun disappeared, and people sought protection through charms, incantations, or offerings. Clay tablets preserve prayers whispered at night, appeals to ward off demons or restless ghosts. The darkness was not only feared, but acknowledged as part of the divine order, a force that could not be ignored. Rituals became a means of negotiating with it, of ensuring that unseen beings did not intrude upon the fragile safety of the household. In Greece, the goddess Nyx embodied the night itself, a figure of immense power who even the gods respected. To the Greeks, night was not simply emptiness, but a divine presence, mother to sleep, dreams, and death. Festivals sometimes incorporated nighttime processions, torches carried through the streets to honor the gods and to transform darkness into sacred space. These ceremonies allowed participants to feel that they were not merely enduring the night, but shaping it, filling it with meaning and celebration. Other cultures saw darkness as a time when communication with the divine was easier. In some traditions, dreams were thought to carry messages from gods or ancestors, and the long hours of night were a bridge between the human and spiritual realms. People prepared themselves before sleep with prayers, hoping that visions would bring guidance or reassurance. The silence of night, so stark and profound, became the setting for revelations. To be awake in those hours, staring into embers or watching the stars, was to stand closer to mysteries that daylight concealed. Rituals also surrounded fire, humanity's most powerful defense against darkness. Lighting a communal fire was often a sacred act, accompanied by prayers or blessings. Seasonal festivals used great bonfires to mark the turning of the year, moments when the balance of light and dark shifted. In Celtic traditions, Beltane and Samhain were celebrated with flames that both honored the gods and warded off spirits. The fire was more than warmth and light. It was a declaration of human resilience, a symbol that the community could face the night together. Candles and oil lamps, too, took on sacred meaning. Their flames were offerings, their steady glow seen as a reflection of divine presence. In Christian tradition, lamps burning before altars signified eternal light, triumphing over darkness. In Hindu households, the lighting of lamps during Diwali marked the victory of light over shadow, of knowledge over ignorance. The symbolism of light was always sharpened by the reality of the dark, for without the vast blackness of night, a small flame would not carry such weight. Darkness also carried associations with death and the unknown. Burial rituals often took place at dusk or dawn, liminal times when the boundary between worlds seemed thinner. In many cultures, the journey of the soul was imagined as one through shadow, guided by stars, torches, or the fires of ritual. Mourners lit candles or lamps to accompany the dead, believing that light eased the passage into the next realm. The connection between night and death was unavoidable, but through ritual, people sought to transform fear into reverence. Not all rituals were solemn. Some embraced darkness as a time of joy and transformation. Festivals with music, dance, and torchlight turned night into celebration, harnessing its mystery rather than shrinking from it. The glow of fire against a black sky heightened the sense of wonder, making the event feel otherworldly. Participants felt themselves stepping outside ordinary time, joining ancestors, gods, and unseen forces in a shared experience. Such rituals showed that darkness was not always enemy, it was also opportunity, a space in which imagination and spirit thrived. Everyday practices, too, reflected the spiritual weight of night. Families might whisper blessings before extinguishing the last light, calling on gods or ancestors to guard the household until dawn. Charms were placed near doorways and windows, both physical barriers and spiritual ones, to keep harmful forces outside. Mothers soothed children with lullabies that spoke of protective spirits watching over them, weaving comfort into fear. Even the act of tending a hearth carried ritual meaning, for to keep the flame alive through the night was to ensure continuity, safety, and divine favor. The duality of darkness, threat, and sanctuary, fear and wisdom shaped the way people related to it. On one hand, it was the domain of thieves, predators, and spirits. On the other, it was the time for rest, dreams, and communion with the divine. Rituals helped navigate this tension, giving structure to uncertainty and turning vulnerability into meaning. Through them, people found a sense of agency, however small, in the face of a force beyond their control. Imagine a village gathered around a bonfire at midwinter, sparks rising into the cold sky as drums beat and voices chant. The fire is not only warmth, it is a ritual act, a statement that the community will endure the long nights and wait together for the sun's return. Or picture a family in a simple home, lighting a small oil lamp before an image of their deity, praying quietly as shadows gather. These moments reveal how profoundly humans shaped their relationship with darkness through ritual. Night was never just endured. It was transformed, given meaning, and folded into the rhythm of life. And so, before lanterns brought steady light into every street and home, darkness carried weight far beyond the practical. It was a spiritual landscape, one that demanded respect, fear, and reverence. Through ritual, people wove themselves into its mysteries, finding comfort where there might have been only terror, and meaning where there might have been only void. Darkness was not empty. It was full, alive with presence, both human and divine. The darkness of night was never the same across the year. Seasons shaped its length, its weight, and its meaning in ways that profoundly influenced how people lived before lanterns. In summer, nights could feel brief and almost gentle, a pause between long hours of work under the sun. But in winter, darkness stretched across half the day, pressing on body and mind with a force that demanded adaptation. To understand life before steady artificial light, one must understand how seasonal cycles of darkness framed existence itself. In regions closer to the equator, the difference between seasons was less extreme, yet even there, variations mattered. Nights were long enough to require caution, fire, and ritual, but short enough that people could expect the dawn to arrive reliably after a manageable interval. In temperate regions, however, the contrast was stark. Winter nights might last 14 or even 16 hours, leaving families enclosed in their homes for long stretches of time. Summer, by contrast, gave the illusion of endless daylight, when work could continue well into the evening without fear. This rhythm shaped agriculture, labor, and even spirituality, for people could not escape the reality that time itself changed with the seasons. In winter, darkness carried heavy burdens. For farmers, tasks were limited by daylight, forcing all essential work into the brief hours between dawn and dusk. The long nights demanded greater use of candles, oil lamps, and hearth fires, straining resources. Wood had to be gathered and stored in advance, fat rendered into tallow, and oil carefully rationed. A family that failed to prepare might find itself plunged into hunger and cold, the darkness amplifying both. Winter nights were also colder, and without steady fire, the home became inhospitable. People huddled together not only for warmth, but also for the reassurance of company in such prolonged blackness. These conditions shaped sleep patterns. Long nights often encouraged segmented sleep. People would rest for several hours, wake in the middle of the night to tend fires, pray, or talk quietly, and then return to slumber until dawn. This pattern gave rise to customs of first sleep and second sleep, deeply rooted in the seasonal rhythm. In summer, by contrast, shorter nights often led to lighter, more continuous rest, as the cycle of activity demanded greater use of every available hour of light. A psychological effect of seasonal darkness was profound. Winter nights could feel endless, weighing heavily on mood and spirit. Communities responded with rituals of light festivals that placed fire, candles, or torches at their center. These celebrations were not merely symbolic, but practical, lifting spirits and reinforcing the hope that the sun would return in strength. Bonfires lit on solstices, candles burned in midwinter rituals, and processions of light all served to counterbalance the oppressive length of night. Without such practices, the darkness might have felt unbearable, eroding morale and fostering despair. Animals, too, influenced human responses to seasonal darkness. In many regions, predators grew bolder in winter, when hunger drove them closer to villages and farms. Wolves in Europe, for example, were often most feared during cold months, their howls echoing across snow-covered fields at night. This heightened the sense of vulnerability and reminded communities of the necessity of preparation. A poorly secured animal pen or an untended fire could mean disaster in conditions where survival already hung in the balance. By contrast, summer nights offered relief and opportunity. Travelers sometimes used them to move in cooler hours, guided by moonlight, avoiding the heat of day. Festivals often extended into the evening, when the air was more comfortable and darkness arrived gently. Work, too, spilled past sunset, with farmers harvesting by twilight or craftsmen finishing tasks outside their homes, while fireflies danced in the fields. Summer nights carried a sense of possibility rather than menace, though dangers still lingered. Bandits and thieves did not rest, and shadows could still conceal hazards. But the brevity of darkness softened its impact, making it easier to endure. Seasonal darkness also influenced how communities stored and preserved food. In long winters, people relied heavily on what they had set aside during harvest. The dark made it harder to monitor supplies, to cook efficiently, or to manage the preservation of meat and grain. Families spent long hours indoors, their activity restricted, their lives revolving around the hearth. By contrast, the abundance of summer daylight allowed greater activity outside, more communal gatherings, and greater variety in food preparation. These contrasts made seasonal cycles not only a matter of daylight, but of lifestyle itself. The difference in night length between seasons inspired myth and story. Many cultures developed legends explaining why winter nights grew long and heavy while summer nights passed quickly. Myths of the sun's journey, of gods descending into darkness and re-emerging in spring, reflected this rhythm. In northern regions, where winters were especially harsh, these stories carried deep emotional weight, offering explanations and hope in the face of difficult realities. To imagine the sun as a warrior battling through the long night, or as a goddess hidden away until her return, gave meaning to the cycles that governed human life. Communities also developed practical strategies to cope. In winter, people organized indoor tasks, spinning, weaving, repairing tools, and preparing goods for trade. These long nights became times of quiet industry, turning the limitations of darkness into opportunities for productivity that did not require daylight. Children were taught stories, songs, and skills by firelight, ensuring that knowledge was passed on during seasons when outdoor labor was limited. In summer, by contrast, life surged outward, and a brief darkness was less an obstacle than a short pause before activity resumed. Seasonal variation in darkness also revealed inequality. Wealthy households, with greater stores of candles, oil, and wood, could soften the burden of long nights, keeping spaces lit and comfortable even in the depth of winter. Poorer families, by contrast, endured darkness more directly, their evenings shorter, their reliance on fire absolute. This divide shaped experiences of night profoundly, determining whether it was endured with relative comfort or with anxious waiting for dawn. To imagine seasonal challenges is to picture two very different nights. In winter, a family gathered tightly around a small fire, the wind howling outside, the hours stretching endlessly as embers are coaxed back to life again and again. Shadows dominate the home, and each creak in the darkness seems louder than it should. In summer, the same family sits outdoors in twilight, sharing food and conversation, the night descending gently, and the air filled with the hum of insects. Both are nights without lanterns, but their tone is entirely different, shaped by the season and the weight of darkness. Ultimately, the cycles of night and day across the seasons taught humanity lessons of patience, adaptation, and resilience. Darkness was never uniform. It shifted with time of year, with place, with circumstance. Communities learned to respect its rhythm, to prepare for its challenges, and to celebrate its turning. Before lanterns banished much of its power, darkness was both a burden and a teacher, reminding people that they lived not apart from the natural world, but deeply bound to its cycles. When the sun set and the world dissolved into darkness, a new set of responsibilities fell to those who kept vigil while others slept. Before lanterns, when streets and countryside alike vanished into shadow, the safety of a community often depended on a handful of watchmen who patrolled, guarded, and kept the fires burning. These figures, sometimes feared, sometimes admired, lived in the in-between of night, protectors against danger, voices of reassurance, and constant reminders of humanity's vulnerability to the unseen. The concept of the night watch appeared in many forms across cultures. In small villages, it might be nothing more than a few men taking turns to walk the perimeter, carrying torches or staffs, their eyes straining to catch movement at the edge of the firelight. In larger towns and cities, the watch became more formalized, with appointed guards responsible for patrolling streets, enforcing curfews, and keeping order after dark. Their duties were practical, but their presence was also symbolic. As long as someone was awake and vigilant, the night could be faced with greater confidence. The tools of the watch were simple yet essential. A torch or lantern, when available, offered a small circle of light. Weapons, whether swords, spears, or clubs, gave them a measure of defense. Bells, horns, or rattles allowed them to sound alarms, alerting entire communities to danger. Their voices, calling out the hours or announcing that all is well, were perhaps the most powerful tool of all. These cries reassured sleepers that vigilance continued, but they also reminded everyone that danger was real enough to require constant guarding. In many cities, the night watch was tasked not only with protection from thieves or raiders, but also with preventing fires. A single flame could reduce entire neighborhoods of wooden homes to ash, and so watchmen sniffed the air for smoke, checked that public fires were properly contained, and carried water or sand for emergencies. Their role as guardians against both human and elemental threats made them indispensable. Yet their authority also carried suspicion. In some places, watchmen were poorly paid and prone to corruption, demanding bribes to ignore curfew violations or using their power to intimidate the vulnerable. Fear and respect mingled in the way ordinary people regarded them. The rhythm of the watch shaped the night itself. Hours were often divided into watches, each lasting a few hours, marked by bells, drums, or horns. These signals structured time for those awake, turning endless darkness into measurable segments. A traveler hearing the call of a watchman might know it was midnight, or that dawn was not far off. Such divisions offered comfort, transforming the amorphous night into a series of milestones that could be endured. The night watch was also deeply social. In villages, families relied on the knowledge that someone else was outside, scanning the darkness. In cities, the presence of guards on corners discouraged crime and gave a sense of order to streets otherwise surrendered to chaos. Even when danger remained, the existence of a watch meant that individuals did not face it alone. It was a collective act of resilience, shared across the community. For the watchmen themselves, the experience of the night was different from that of those they protected. While others slept, they walked streets empty of bustle, hearing sounds amplified by silence. The echo of their own footsteps, the distant barking of dogs, the rustle of wind through alleys. The city or village became almost unrecognizable, transformed into a quiet landscape where every movement felt significant. Their senses sharpened, and their imaginations often filled gaps left by limited light. Loneliness, too, was a constant companion. To walk for hours in darkness, with only a torch or faint moonlight for company, required both patience and courage. The duties of the watch extended beyond safety. They were often tasked with enforcing social order, ensuring that curfews were kept, that taverns did not overflow into streets, and that fights were quickly broken up. Those found wandering without purpose might be questioned, fined, or even arrested. In this way, the night watch was not only a shield against external threats, but also a tool of control, shaping how people lived and moved after sunset. For some, this presence was reassuring. For others, it was restrictive, a reminder that the night belonged less to individuals and more to the authority of the community. Despite these tensions, rituals often elevated the role of the watch. In some cultures, prayers or blessings were offered to those who kept vigil, recognizing their sacrifice of sleep for the safety of others. In others, the night watch was tied to spiritual duty, with the idea that darkness itself needed to be kept in check through human effort. Soldiers on night guard within armies carried similar burdens. Their watch seen as both practical and symbolic, a stand against chaos and vulnerability when the camp was at its most exposed. The sensory world of the night watch was vivid. A flickering torch might reveal only fragments of a street, while shadows stretched endlessly beyond. The air was cooler, carrying scents of smoke, damp earth, or refuse. Sounds traveled farther, a cart rattling in the distance, or the faint hum of insects near a river. Watchmen learned to interpret these signals, distinguishing between ordinary noises and signs of danger. Their skill lay not only in vigilance, but in judgment, knowing when to raise alarm and when to let the night pass in silence. For the community, the night watch became part of the rhythm of life. People listened for their calls before settling deeper into sleep. Children sometimes imitated them in play, pretending to patrol with sticks or to sound the alarm. The knowledge that the watch was present, however imperfect, offered a thread of continuity from dusk to dawn. It was reassurance that humanity did not surrender entirely to darkness, that someone, somewhere, remained awake, holding the line. To imagine the night watch is to picture solitary figures moving through empty streets or along village fences, their flames small against the vast dark. Their eyes scan shadows, their ears strain for sound, their steps mark time in places otherwise still. They are both guardians and symbols, representing the collective will to endure and to push back, however modestly, against the dangers of night. Before lanterns illuminated the world, it was these watchers who stood between sleep and threat, their presence fragile yet essential. And so, the story of the night watch is the story of vigilance, of shared responsibility, and of the delicate balance between fear and safety. They were not always heroic, not always noble, but they embodied humanity's determination to survive the night together. Each call, each step, each flicker of light was part of the long struggle to make darkness less absolute, to remind every sleeper that though the night was vast, it was not unguarded. Though the night was filled with danger, silence, and uncertainty, it also provided fertile ground for imagination. Before lanterns brought steadier illumination, and before electricity erased the sharp boundary between day and night, darkness itself became a canvas on which humanity painted stories, songs, and dreams. With work limited and movement restricted, people turned inward, both to themselves and to each other. Out of the hush of night came creativity born, not despite the darkness, but because of it. For families gathered around hearths, the long evenings became times of storytelling. Without books for most, and without steady light for reading, history and memory passed from mouth to ear, generation after generation. Elders spoke of ancestors, of battles fought, of migrations and trials. Myths explained the movements of the stars above, the thunder in the sky, or the cycle of seasons. Children listened wide-eyed, the fire's glow reflecting in their faces. And in those moments, the darkness became less menacing. It transformed into a backdrop against which imagination could roam freely. These stories were more than entertainment. They were education, memory, and a way of binding people together against the uncertainty pressing at their doors. Music, too, thrived in the dark. A simple drum beat, a flute carved from reed or bone, the rhythm of hands clapping, these sounds filled the silence and turned anxiety into celebration. Singing soothed children, enlivened gatherings, and eased the long stretch of hours before sleep. Songs often carried history and faith within their verses, embedding wisdom in melody. The absence of light heightened the power of sound, making even small gatherings feel sacred, and turning the act of singing into both comfort and connection. In some traditions, the night itself became a muse. Poets and thinkers found inspiration in the stars, in the silence of sleeping villages, or in the flickering of a single candle. The stillness sharpened reflection, allowing thoughts to wander in ways the busyness of day rarely permitted. Many of the oldest surviving texts hint at nighttime musings, where the quiet gave space for meditations on life, death, and the divine. For some, the dark was not emptiness, but a kind of companion, offering perspective and depth. Darkness also encouraged craft. Spinning, weaving, and mending often took place by hearth or lamplight, tasks that could be done with minimal vision once the motions were learned. These repetitive activities filled the hours with productivity and rhythm, while conversation flowed around them. Hands worked even as minds wandered, turning necessity into art. Patterns emerged in textiles, tools were shaped with care, and small details grew in importance, all in the glow of modest flames. The night, restrictive as it was, became a workshop for skill and patience. Communal creativity flourished in festivals and rituals that embraced night rather than resisted it. Fire dances, torch processions, and bonfires turned darkness into spectacle. Sparks rising into the sky resembled stars, and the laughter and music surrounding them transformed fear into joy. These celebrations often marked turning points in the year harvests, solstices, or victories moments when communities needed to reaffirm hope. By filling the night with sound, light, and creativity, they turned vulnerability into strength. Dreams themselves were seen as creative gifts of the dark. With segmented sleep common, people often awoke in the middle of the night and shared their visions before returning to slumber. Dreams were interpreted as messages from gods or ancestors, shaping decisions or inspiring rituals. They also became seeds for stories, symbols woven into myths that endured for generations. Night provided the stage, and the human mind filled it with drama, imagery, and meaning. Children played their own role in nighttime creativity. Their questions about shadows, stars, and sounds fueled explanations that grew into fables. A child asking why the owl calls at night might inspire a tale of transformation or warning. A sudden gust of wind rattling shutters could become the basis for a story of spirits passing by. The vulnerability of youth merged with the inventiveness of parents and elders, producing a cycle of storytelling that reinforced cultural identity and imagination. The sensory richness of night deepened creative expression. The flicker of fire created shapes on walls that looked like animals or spirits. The smell of smoke and earth became part of memory. The crackle of wood and the hiss of sap provided rhythm and atmosphere. Every detail of the dark world carried potential to spark thought. Where light limited mystery, darkness expanded it, leaving room for minds to invent, to interpret, and to dream. In more urban settings, creativity took on other forms. Night brought poets and musicians together in taverns, where songs and verses carried through smoky air. Philosophers walked and talked beneath the stars, their debates shaped by the hush of sleeping cities. Even danger could fuel art, as stories of thieves, shadows, and watchmen became tales that echoed through streets, long after the events themselves. The night was not only endured, it was woven into culture and memory, shaping identities of entire communities. Religious creativity also thrived in the dark. Rituals often used the stark contrast of light and shadow to heighten spiritual experience. Lamps burning in temples, candles flickering in processions, or torches blazing against the blackness gave worshippers the sense that they were touching the divine. The artistry of religion chants, hymns, and symbols drew heavily upon the imagery of night. Darkness was not merely obstacle. It was a canvas upon which sacred meaning was painted. To imagine creativity born from darkness is to see a circle of people gathered in silence, then slowly breaking into song. It is to picture a mother weaving by firelight while telling her child a story of gods and heroes. It is to envision philosophers pacing under the stars, their voices low, but their thoughts vast. Night, so full of uncertainty, became equally full of inspiration, giving birth to art, music, story, and ritual that might not have flourished in constant daylight. Ultimately, the restrictions of darkness nurtured imagination. When movement was curtailed, when vision faltered, the mind expanded. The absence of light invited presence of thought. Humanity filled the void not only with fear, but with invention, creativity, and beauty. Before lanterns, before the artificial brilliance that made night almost like day, darkness was both limitation and gift. And out of its depths came some of the most enduring expressions of what it means to be human. The story of humanity's relationship with darkness is, in many ways, the story of progress. From the earliest fires kindled in caves to the refined lanterns that would one day glow steadily against the night, each step forward represented not only a technical innovation, but a profound change in how people lived, worked, and dreamed. The march toward better light was slow, often uneven, but it transformed the very meaning of night. Where once it was an overpowering force that dictated every rhythm of life, it gradually became a domain that humans could shape, extend, and soften. It began with the mastery of fire, but the leap from communal hearths and torches to more controlled forms of light took centuries. Candles refined the flame, concentrating it into small, portable forms. Oil lamps steadied it, giving it longevity and a calmer glow. Yet both were fragile and limited. Candles consumed quickly, and their expense meant they could not be wasted. Oil lamps required a constant supply of fuel, not always available to the poor. These methods carved out pockets of light, but they did not conquer the night. The march toward better illumination was driven by the desire not simply to see, but to live more fully in hours once surrendered to shadow. Lanterns marked a crucial advance. By enclosing a flame within glass, horn, or thin sheets of metal, lanterns protected it from wind, reduced the risk of fire, and allowed people to carry light more securely into the night. A lantern could be hung at a doorway, guiding travelers home, or carried through streets without fear of it extinguishing in a gust. Soldiers and watchmen favored them, for they steadied the flame during patrols. Merchants used them to keep shops open later, their glow spilling into narrow lanes. The lantern did not banish the dark, but it made movement through it safer, more reliable, and less exhausting. The introduction of better fuels furthered this progress. Olive oil remained common in Mediterranean regions, but other oils, like whale oil, became prized in later centuries for their brightness and longer burn. Tallow candles gave way, in wealthier places, to beeswax, which burned with less smoke and a sweeter scent. Each refinement made light steadier, cleaner, and more practical, turning night from an enemy into a space of possibility. Still, these advances spread unevenly. The poor continued to live largely by the rhythms of the sun, while the wealthy began to stretch their days with artificial light, creating a divide in experience that echoed across centuries. The march toward better light was not only technological but cultural. As light sources improved, so did the willingness to embrace nighttime activity. Cities began to experiment with rudimentary street lighting. In some cases, lamps were mounted along main thoroughfares or near city gates, maintained by watchmen or appointed caretakers. Though faint by modern standards, these efforts represented a shift in how night was perceived. No longer was it solely a time of retreat. It was slowly becoming a space for commerce, social life, and movement. This gradual illumination also shaped thought and imagination. Philosophers saw in the improvement of light a metaphor for knowledge, for enlightenment. To move from the flicker of a firebrand to the steady glow of a lamp was to move closer to clarity, both literally and symbolically. Artists and writers used light and shadow in new ways, their creativity influenced by the tools available to them. Religion, too, adapted, with lamps and candles playing increasingly central roles in rituals that emphasized the triumph of light over darkness. Each innovation carried spiritual as well as practical weight. Yet the march was slow. For countless generations, people still lived much as their ancestors had, measuring days by the sun and nights by the dim glow of fire. Innovation spread unevenly, dependent on trade, resources, and cultural exchange. A fisherman in a small village might still rely on a firebrand pulled from the hearth, while in a distant city, a wealthy merchant might dine by the glow of beeswax candles. The contrast between these experiences reminds us that progress was not uniform, but layered across geography and class. The desire for better light reflected deeper human needs. It was about safety reducing the threat of predators, thieves, and accidents. It was about productivity extending hours of work, study, and conversation. But it was also about imagination. To hold a steady flame was to feel mastery over an element once beyond control. To brighten the night was to push back against the limits of nature, to claim more of the world as human domain. Each step forward revealed both ingenuity and aspiration, showing that humanity's relationship with darkness was never passive. As better lights emerged, the character of night shifted. Where once it had been absolute, broken only by moon, stars, and fire, it became increasingly fragmented. Islands of brightness appeared, homes lit by candles, streets dotted with lamps, temples glowing with sacred flames. Darkness no longer ruled entirely. It was negotiated with, carved into smaller pieces. This transformation reshaped society, making night less a time of fear and more a time of choice. People could decide whether to sleep, to work, or to gather, depending on the resources they had at hand. But the march toward light carried its own consequences. With more illumination came longer hours of labor, particularly for those in service to wealthier households or employers. Where once the dark enforced rest, artificial light extended demands on workers, blurring the natural rhythm of day and night. The gift of light was therefore also a burden, unevenly distributed and sometimes exploited. The history of better illumination is as much about power and inequality as it is about innovation. Still, the trajectory was clear. Step by step, humanity moved toward mastery of the night. From the spark of tinder to the steady lantern flame, each advance represented centuries of experimentation, trial, and adaptation. The darkness remained vast, but its hold on human life weakened. Hope and creativity flourished in its margins, and with each new source of light, the possibilities of night expanded. To imagine this slow march is to see generations passing down skills: how to make tallow candles, how to craft wicks, how to shape clay lamps, how to enclose a flame within horn or glass. It is to see families marveling at a brighter glow, or soldiers walking more confidently with a lantern held high. It is to feel the gradual shift from fear to familiarity, from retreat to resilience. The story of better light is not merely technical, it is profoundly human. It reflects the desire to see more clearly, to extend time, to create beauty, and to live more fully. Each flame steadied, each shadow softened, was a victory. And though lanterns and later innovations would change the world entirely, it was this long, patient march from flicker to glow that first taught humanity that night could be shaped, that darkness need not be absolute. Darkness was not only a physical condition, it was a mental and emotional experience. For people who lived before lanterns, the night was not something one could ignore. It pressed upon the senses, shaped the imagination, and influenced the rhythm of thought and feeling. Without steady illumination, the human mind encountered darkness directly, and in that encounter arose both fear and comfort, terror and intimacy. The psychological world of darkness was as real as the shadows themselves. The most immediate effect of night was vulnerability. With vision limited, people became acutely aware of how dependent they were on other senses. Every creak of wood, every rustle in the brush, every distant cry seemed magnified. The imagination filled the gaps left by sight, often with unsettling possibilities. A harmless breeze moving through trees could be perceived as an intruder, a predator, or a spirit. This tendency was not weakness, but survival instinct. Better to imagine danger where none existed than to ignore it and risk harm. In this way, fear became woven into the fabric of nightly life, shaping habits, rituals, and even stories. Yet fear was not the only psychological response. Darkness also created intimacy. Families and communities huddled closer when the night fell, drawing comfort from the warmth of bodies and the sound of voices. Within homes, the absence of light softened the world, blurring imperfections and focusing attention on the presence of others. Whispers replaced shouts, and stories carried more weight in the hush of shadows. Night encouraged closeness, and in that closeness, bonds deepened. Darkness, for all its threats, also nurtured connection. Sleep itself was part of this psychological landscape. Long nights, especially in winter, encouraged segmented rest. People often slept in 2 phases, with a period of wakefulness in between. During those hours, some prayed, others reflected, and some shared quiet conversation. This time, known in later writings as the watch or the space between first sleep and second sleep, offered a different relationship to darkness. It became a contemplative period, a chance to encounter the self and the world without distraction. In the absence of lanterns, these hours felt sacred, filled with both silence and possibility. Dreams, too, held special power. The long nights gave space for vivid dreaming, and people believed their visions carried meaning. Dreams were messages from gods, ancestors, or the hidden parts of the self. They were retold at dawn, discussed as warnings, guidance, or blessings. The darkness of night became a gateway to these inner landscapes, linking the physical absence of light to the mystery of the unconscious mind. The boundary between reality and imagination blurred, and in that blur lay both wonder and unease. Darkness also shaped time itself. Without artificial light, night seemed longer, its hours stretching endlessly. This perception affected mood, making people restless, anxious, or weary. At the same time, night could also feel fleeting, with hours vanishing into sleep or quiet work by firelight. The fluidity of time in darkness gave it a dreamlike quality, a sense that the ordinary rules of day did not fully apply. For many, this quality was unsettling, but for others, it was liberating, a space where creativity and reflection could flourish. The psychological world of darkness was reinforced by stories and beliefs. Folklore painted the night as a domain of spirits, witches, or demons, and children grew up internalizing these associations. Even adults carried them, shaping their perceptions of every sound and shadow. Darkness was not neutral. It was charged with meaning. A crossroads at midnight was not just a meeting of paths. It was a place where spirits gathered. A ruined building at dusk was not simply abandoned. It was haunted. These interpretations magnified the power of night, embedding it deeply in the collective psyche. At the same time, darkness offered freedom. Hidden by shadows, people could act outside the constraints of social order. Lovers met in secret, rebels plotted against rulers, and those marginalized by society found space to exist without constant scrutiny. Night was both feared and desired, a realm of possibility as much as peril. This duality made it psychologically complex, never one thing, always layered with contradiction. Children experienced the night in especially vivid ways. Their fears of monsters or spirits lurking in the dark reflected both imagination and inherited cultural stories. Parents soothed them with lullabies, prayers, or charms, transforming the frightening into the manageable. These rituals not only calmed children, but also reinforced the broader cultural meaning of darkness. Each generation learned anew how to navigate the psychological landscape of night, balancing fear with comfort, vigilance with trust. The absence of light also deepened self-awareness. In the silence of dark hours, people were left with their own thoughts in ways that daylight busyness prevented. This could be unsettling, confronting individuals with doubts, regrets, or worries. But it could also be healing, offering time for reflection and prayer. Darkness became a mirror, revealing inner truths as surely as daylight revealed the outer world. To imagine the psychological world of darkness is to picture a family lying in silence, listening to the crackle of dying embers. Each member feels the vastness of night pressing in, yet also the comfort of others nearby. Or to imagine a traveler alone on a road, every sound magnified, the mind filling shadows with imagined threats, until the faint glow of a village fire offers relief. Or to picture a monk awake in the deep hours, writing by the dim light of an oil lamp, the silence around him opening space for thoughts that might never come in daylight. Darkness was never simply endured. It was interpreted, lived, and shaped by the human mind. It could terrify, but it could also comfort. It could isolate, but it could also connect. It was an ever-present force, shaping culture, ritual, and imagination as much as it shaped sleep and work. Before lanterns softened its hold, night was a psychological frontier, one that tested endurance, deepened relationships, and inspired both dread and creativity. And so, the story of darkness is not only about the absence of light, but about the fullness of human response. It reveals resilience, imagination, and the deep capacity of people to find meaning in what might otherwise seem empty. In darkness, humanity discovered both its fears and its strength, both its fragility and its depth. The story of humanity before lanterns is, at its heart, the story of how people learned to live with darkness. It is a story of vulnerability, ingenuity, and imagination, one that reveals just how deeply absence of light shaped every aspect of life. From the first sparks of fire to the steady glow of candles and oil lamps, each generation faced the same question: how do we endure the long hours when the sun has gone? We have seen how night defined daily rhythm. It dictated when people worked, when they rested, and when they gathered. Darkness imposed boundaries that no one could ignore, compressing activity into hours of daylight and demanding caution once the shadows grew. Families relied on fire to anchor their homes, communities relied on watchmen to guard their boundaries, and travelers relied on memory, moon, and stars to find their way. Night was always present, always powerful, always a force that reminded humanity of its limits. Yet darkness was not only obstacle, it was also opportunity. It brought families closer, encouraging storytelling, song, and quiet reflection. It created spaces for dreams and rituals, for creativity born out of stillness. It inspired myths and legends that explained the movement of stars, the cycles of seasons, and the mysteries of life and death. It gave rise to rituals of light candles in temples, bonfires in fields, torches in processions that transformed fear into meaning. Darkness pressed heavily on the human spirit, but it also nourished it, giving rise to some of the most enduring cultural expressions of the past. The dangers of the night were real. Predators stalked livestock, thieves prowled streets, and fire threatened to consume entire settlements. Accidents and injuries were common, made more dangerous by the absence of light. These risks shaped habits and traditions, encouraging caution and vigilance. But they also inspired adaptation. People learned to navigate homes without sight, to interpret sounds in the absence of vision, and to depend on one another for safety. The night was humbling, yet it was also formative, teaching resilience and cooperation. The slow march toward better light marked a turning point. Candles and oil lamps gave new steadiness. Lanterns offered protection for flames, and the spread of better fuels extended activity deeper into the night. Each advance changed how people related to darkness, carving it into smaller pieces, softening its weight. The wealthiest could fill rooms with golden glow, while the poor still lived largely by the cycle of the sun. This divide shaped the experience of night, but the trajectory was clear. Humanity was learning to bend the darkness to its will. Psychologically, night shaped imagination as much as it shaped behavior. Fear of unseen threats gave rise to folklore filled with spirits and monsters. Silence and stillness created space for reflection and creativity. Dreams were understood as messages, and the hours between first and second sleep became times of prayer, conversation, and thought. Darkness was not empty. It was filled with meaning, woven deeply into the human psyche. When we look back now, from an age where darkness can be banished with the flick of a switch, it is easy to forget how total it once was. We rarely experience true night, unbroken by lamps, lanterns, or electric glow. Yet for most of human history, darkness was absolute, a force as certain as the rising of the sun. To live before lanterns was to live with that reality every day, to shape one's life around it, and to learn both caution and creativity in its embrace. There is something profoundly humbling in this remembrance. It reminds us of the fragility of human life, of the courage required simply to endure each night. But it also reminds us of resilience. For every danger, people found a response. For every fear, they created a ritual or a story. The darkness did not defeat them. Instead, it shaped them, giving rise to traditions, communities, and innovations that still echo in our lives today. To imagine those nights is to see families gathered around a fire, their faces flickering with light and shadow. It is to hear the voice of a watchman calling the hours in a sleeping city. It is to picture travelers whispering prayers under the stars, or poets finding inspiration in the silence of midnight. It is to understand that darkness was not only endured, it was lived deeply and fully with all its fears and wonders. And so, as we close this journey, remember that the night you know today is not the night your ancestors knew. Their night was heavier, deeper, filled with risk and mystery. But it was also filled with meaning, with connection, with creativity born of necessity. They lived in a world where light was precious, and because of that, they treasured it more deeply than we often do. If you've listened this far, thank you for joining me in this exploration. I hope the gentle pace and steady rhythm have helped ease you toward rest, or at least given you something to reflect on as you drift into dreams. Before you go, don't you forget to subscribe to the channel so you can join me again for more journeys into the past. And please, leave a comment sharing what kinds of history you'd like to hear about, or even just when you find yourself listening, whether it's at bedtime, during a quiet afternoon, or in the middle of the night. Your thoughts not only help me, but also help shape the space for others who, like you, come here for comfort and calm. So now, let the last of these words fade into silence. Let the story of darkness remind you that you are part of a long human tradition, of people who faced the night, feared it, endured it, and also found beauty within it. May the quiet of history accompany you into rest, and may your dreams carry you gently into the light of another dawn.